Hey friends, welcome to the Horror Sleep. Almost 90% of you watching aren't subscribed. If you enjoy these true park ranger horror stories, hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps the channel. Oh, and where are you watching from tonight? Let me know in the comments. Have you ever come across something that didn't quite feel right? Something that seemed normal on the surface. But when you really looked at it, your instincts started screaming that something was wrong. That's exactly what happened to me on the Snake River in June 2019. What began as a routine patrol turned into something I still struggle to fully explain even 5 years later. My name is Weston Cole. I've been a park ranger for about 15 years, working in the most remote areas of Idaho. Mountains where you won't see a footprint for months. Forests so dense you can lose your sense of direction in minutes. Rivers carving through rocks as if the world were angry. I thought I'd seen it all. I thought I knew everything the wild could do. I was wrong. Hell's Canyon is one of the deepest river gorges in North America. The Snake River runs through it like a dark green vein, cutting between rock walls that rise over a mile high. It's beautiful in that raw, dangerous way that makes you feel small. The kind of place where sound behaves strangely. You can shout and hear nothing back, or you can whisper and hear it bounce off the canyon walls for what feels like forever. The canyon swallows things, voices, light, sometimes people. I was stationed at a small ranger outpost about 12 miles from the main visitor center. Just me and whatever temporary staff they'd rotate through during peak season. It was early in the season, so I was alone. That suited me fine. I'd always preferred the quiet. That morning, I woke up before dawn like I always did. Made coffee in my small cabin, checked the weather reports, grabbed my radio and day pack, and headed out for patrol. The sun hadn't cleared the canyon rim yet, so everything was still in shadow. The air was cool and damp, and mist hung over the water in thin sheets that looked like ghosts drifting downstream. I was walking the trail along the riverbank, checking for signs of illegal camping or abandoned gear. Rafters and kayakers love Hell's Canyon, but they don't always love following the rules. I'd find beer cans, torn tents, fire rings built too close to the water. Part of my job was keeping the place clean and safe. The river was running high that morning. Spring runoff from the mountains meant the current was strong and fast. White foam churned around the rocks, and the sound of rushing water filled the canyon like constant thunder. You couldn't hear anything else when the river was like this. Not birds, not wind, just water. I was maybe 2 miles into my patrol when I saw it. A kayak. It was sitting in the middle of the river, maybe 30 yards out from the bank. Not capsized, not caught on a rock, just floating there. Upright and still, like someone had parked it and walked away. I stopped and stared at it for a long moment, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The current should have been pulling it downstream. The river was moving fast enough to drag a full-grown person under, but this kayak was just sitting there completely motionless, like it was anchored to something invisible beneath the surface. But that wasn't the strangest part. There were no paddles. Every kayaker I'd ever seen carried at least one paddle, usually strapped to the deck or held across their lap. But this kayak had nothing. No paddle, no dry bag, no gear of any kind. Just an empty yellow shell floating in the middle of a river that should have been tearing it apart. I pulled out my binoculars and focused on the kayak. It was a standard recreational model, bright yellow with black trim. The kind you'd rent from an outfitter or buy from a sporting goods store. There were no visible holes or damage. The seat was empty. The cockpit was dry. And then I noticed something else. The kayak wasn't moving with the current. It wasn't drifting or spinning or bobbing. It was perfectly still, like it was frozen in place. That's when my gut started screaming. I grabbed my radio and called it in to dispatch. "This is Ranger Hale. I've got a situation on the Snake River about 2 miles south of the outpost. There's an abandoned kayak in the water. No visible occupant, no gear, no paddles. Requesting backup to investigate." The dispatcher's voice crackled back. "Copy that, Ranger Hale. We'll send someone your way. ETA about 40 minutes. 40 minutes, that was fine. I wasn't going anywhere. I kept my binoculars on the kayak, watching it float there in that impossible stillness. The mist was starting to burn off as the sun climbed higher, but the kayak stayed exactly where it was. Not drifting, not turning, just sitting there like a piece of furniture someone had forgotten to move. And that's when I started to feel it. That prickle on the back of your neck. That weight in your chest that tells you something's watching you, even when you can't see it. I've felt it before out in the wilderness. Every ranger has. But this was different. This felt deliberate. Like whatever was watching me wanted me to know it was there. I lowered the binoculars and scanned the canyon walls. Nothing. Just rock and shadow, and the occasional scrub pine clinging to a crack. I looked upstream, then downstream. No boats, no rafts, no kayakers paddling toward me. Just that empty yellow kayak sitting in the middle of the river like a question mark. I started walking along the bank, trying to get a better angle. The trail here was narrow, hemmed in by rocks on one side and a steep drop to the water on the other. I had to watch my footing, but I kept my eyes on the kayak as much as I could. As I got closer, I could see more details. The hull was clean. No scratches, no dents, no signs of impact. The deck lines were intact. The bungee cords used to secure gear were still tight and unbroken. It looked brand new, like someone had just pulled it out of a store and dropped it in the river, but still no paddles, and still that unnatural stillness. I reached a spot where the bank jutted out into the water, forming a small rocky peninsula. From there, I could see the kayak more clearly. It was maybe 20 yards away now, close enough that I could read the manufacturer's logo on the side. And that's when I saw something that made my stomach drop. There was sand on the bottom of the kayak. I could see it through the clear plastic footrest area. A thin layer of sand, spread evenly across the floor of the cockpit like someone had poured it there on purpose. Sand. But there was no sand in this part of the river. The bottom here was all rock and silt. The nearest sandy beach was at least 5 miles downstream, past a series of rapids that would tear a kayak to pieces. So, where did the sand come from? I stood there, staring at it, my mind trying to work through the logic. Maybe the kayak had come from somewhere else. Maybe it had been carried by a flash flood, or dragged upriver by some freak current. But that didn't explain the stillness. It didn't explain the lack of paddles or gear, and it sure as hell didn't explain the sand. I pulled out my radio again. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Hale. I need you to contact all the outfitters in the area, see if anyone's reported a missing kayak. Yellow recreational model, looks new. Also, I need someone with river rescue experience. This thing's not moving, and I don't know why. Copy that, Ranger Hale. I'll make the calls." I sat down on a rock and waited. The sun was fully up now, and the canyon was starting to warm up. The mist was gone, replaced by harsh light that made the water look almost black. I kept my eyes on the kayak, half expecting it to suddenly start drifting or sink or do something that made sense. But it just sat there. 15 minutes later, I heard an engine echoing off the canyon walls. I looked upstream and saw a Park Service boat coming around the bend. At the helm was Milla Jarvis, one of the seasonal rangers who'd been assigned to the canyon for the summer. She was good at her job, better than most, and she knew the river like she'd grown up on it. Milla pulled the boat alongside the bank and killed the engine. "Weston," she called out. "Dispatch said you found something weird." "That's putting it mildly," I said, pointing at the kayak. "Take a look." She grabbed her own binoculars and focused on it. I watched her face change as she processed what she was seeing. Confusion first, then suspicion, then something I'd call unease. "It's not moving," she said slowly. "Nope. No paddles. Nope. And the current should be dragging it downstream." "Yep." She lowered the binoculars and looked at me. "What the hell?" "That's what I said." Mila climbed out of the boat and joined me on the rock. We both stared at the kayak for a moment, neither of us saying anything. The river roared around us, but the kayak stayed perfectly still. "You think it's snagged on something?" Mila asked. "Maybe, but I can't see anything. No rocks, no logs, nothing. Could be a submerged line, fishing line, anchor rope, something like that." "Could be," I said, but I didn't believe it. Something about this felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. Mila turned to me. "You want me to go out there and check it out?" I hesitated. The water was dangerous, and I didn't want to put her at risk. But we needed to know what was going on. "Yeah, but be careful. If the current grabs you, I'm not sure I can get you back." "I've been doing this for 10 years, Weston. I'll be fine." She went back to the boat and pulled on a life jacket, then grabbed a throw rope and tied it around her waist. The other end she secured to a cleat on the boat. "If I get pulled under, you yank this thing hard, got it?" "Got it." Mila eased herself into the water and I felt my chest tighten. The current was strong here, and even with the life jacket and rope, she'd be in trouble if something went wrong. But she was a strong swimmer, and she knew how to read the river. She pushed off from the bank and started swimming toward the kayak. The current tried to grab her, pulling her downstream, but she fought against it, angling her body to cut through the water. I kept one hand on the rope, ready to pull if I needed to. It took her almost 5 minutes to reach the kayak. When she did, she grabbed the edge of the cockpit and held on, catching her breath. Then she pulled herself up and looked inside. Even from where I was standing, I could see her body tense. She looked back at me, and I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen before. Fear. "Weston," she called out, her voice tight. "You need to see this." I pulled Mila back to shore using the rope, and she came quickly, not fighting the current this time but letting me drag her in. When she reached the bank, she climbed out of the water with shaking hands, her face pale despite the exertion. "What did you see?" I asked. She took a moment to catch her breath, water dripping from her hair and clothes. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. "The sand. It's not just on the bottom of the kayak, Weston. It's everywhere. Inside the seat, in the cracks, even in the foam padding. Like someone filled the whole thing with sand and then dumped most of it out. But that doesn't make any sense. Where would it come from? I don't know. But that's not the weirdest part." She looked at me, and I could see she was choosing her words carefully. "The sand is dry." I stared at her. "What?" "The sand inside the kayak is bone dry. Not damp, not wet, completely dry. Like it's been sitting in a desert for years." That didn't make sense. The kayak was in the middle of a river. Even if someone had poured dry sand into it before putting it in the water, the sand should have been soaked within seconds. The cockpit wasn't sealed. Water should have gotten in. But according to Mila, the sand was dry. "There's something else," she said. She reached into her pocket and pulled out something small and dark. It took me a second to realize what it was. A fingernail. Human. Torn, with dried blood still clinging to the base. My stomach turned. "Where did you find that?" "It was stuck in the sand, right at the bottom of the cockpit, near the footrest." I took the fingernail from her and held it up to the light. It was real, no question about it. Someone had lost this, and recently enough that the blood hadn't fully dried. "We need to call this in," I said. "Right now." Mila nodded, and I grabbed my radio again. This time, I didn't call dispatch. I called the county sheriff's department directly. "This is Park Ranger Weston Hale calling from Hell's Canyon. I need to report a potential missing person situation. We've found an abandoned kayak with biological evidence inside. Request immediate assistance." The sheriff's dispatcher put me through to a deputy, and I explained everything. The kayak, the stillness, the sand, the fingernail. The deputy listened without interrupting, then said he'd send someone out within the hour. After I hung up, Mila and I sat on the rocks and stared at the kayak. It was still floating there, perfectly motionless, like it was mocking us. "You ever seen anything like this before?" Mila asked. "Never." "Me neither, and I've been on rivers all over the country. Idaho, Montana, Colorado, Oregon. I've seen capsized rafts, abandoned gear, even bodies, but nothing like this. What do you think happened?" She shook her head. "I don't know. Maybe someone got hurt and tried to stop the bleeding. Maybe the kayak got caught in a weird current, and the person swam to shore, but the sand, I can't explain the sand." Neither could I. And the more I thought about it, the more wrong it felt. The kayak should have been moving. The sand should have been wet. And where were the paddles? You don't just lose both paddles. Even if you capsize, they're usually tethered to the boat. "I want to check the banks," I said. "Upstream and downstream. See if we can find any signs of a struggle or a campsite. Maybe whoever was in that kayak made it to shore." "You think they're still alive?" "I don't know, but I'd rather search and find nothing than not search and miss something." Mila agreed, and we split up. She took the boat and headed upstream to check the north bank. I stayed on foot and started walking downstream, scanning the rocks and brush for any sign of human activity. The canyon was quiet except for the river. No birds singing, no insects buzzing. Just the constant roar of water and the occasional scrape of my boots on rock. I kept my eyes on the ground, looking for footprints, blood, torn clothing, anything that might tell me what happened. I walked for maybe half a mile before I found something. A paddle. It was wedged between two rocks near the water's edge, half submerged and covered in river slime. I pulled it out and examined it. The blade was cracked, and the shaft had deep gouges in it, like something had tried to chew through the fiberglass. Not something, someone. The gouges were the right size and shape for human teeth. I felt a chill run down my spine despite the heat. Someone had bitten this paddle hard enough to leave marks. Not just once, but multiple times. The entire shaft was covered in bite marks, deep and frantic, like whoever did it was in a panic. I radioed Mila. "I found a paddle, south bank, about half a mile downstream from the kayak. It's got bite marks on it." There was a long pause before she responded. "Bite marks?" "Yeah, human. Multiple." "Jesus. Okay, I'm coming back." While I waited for her, I kept searching. A few yards past the paddle, I found something else. Footprints. They were faint, barely visible in the damp sand near the water, but they were there. Bare feet. Small, like they belonged to a woman or a teenager. The prints led away from the water and up toward the trail, but after a few steps, they disappeared into the rocks. I followed the direction they'd been heading and found myself at the base of a steep slope covered in loose scree. It would have been difficult to climb, especially barefoot, but not impossible. I looked up and saw the trail switchbacking above me. If someone had climbed this slope, they would have reached the trail and potentially been able to hike out, but there were no more footprints. No blood, no signs of distress, just those few prints near the water, leading to nowhere. Mila arrived with the boat and climbed out to join me. I showed her the paddle and the footprints, and she examined both with the same grim expression I'd been wearing all morning. "This is bad, Weston," she said quietly. "I know. Whoever was in that kayak was in trouble. Real trouble, and I don't think they made it out. We don't know that yet. Don't we?" She pointed at the paddle. "Someone bit this thing like they were trying to eat it. That's not normal. That's desperation. That's panic. That's someone who's lost their mind." I wanted to argue with her, but I couldn't. She was right. Everything about this situation screamed that something terrible had happened, and we were just now finding the evidence. The sheriff's deputy arrived about 20 minutes later. His name was Travis Malloy, and he'd been working in this area for almost a decade. I knew him from other incidents, and he was good at his job. Professional, thorough, didn't jump to conclusions, but even he looked unsettled when he saw the kayak. "It's still not moving?" he asked. "Nope." "And you said there's sand inside it?" "Dry sand," Mila confirmed. "And a fingernail with blood on it." Travis pulled out his own binoculars and studied the kayak for a long moment. Then he lowered them and turned to me. "I'm going to need to get that kayak out of the water. Can you two help me with that?" "How do you want to do it?" I asked. "I've got a grappling hook in my truck. We can throw it from the boat, snag the kayak, and tow it back to shore." It took us about an hour to get everything ready. Travis went back to his vehicle and returned with the grappling hook and a heavy-duty rope. Mila brought the boat around, and the three of us climbed in. Travis stood at the bow with the hook, and Mila piloted us slowly toward the kayak. As we got closer, I felt that prickle on my neck again, that sense of being watched. I scanned the canyon walls, but there was nothing. Just rock and shadow and empty air. The kayak was about 10 feet away when Travis threw the hook. It arced through the air and landed in the cockpit with a wet thud. He pulled the rope tight, and the hook caught on something inside. "Got it," he said. "Mila, back us up slow." She put the boat in reverse and the rope went taut. For a moment, nothing happened. The kayak stayed exactly where it was, like it was anchored to the riverbed. Then, suddenly, it moved. But not toward us. It moved upstream, against the current. All three of us froze. Mila had the throttle in reverse, pulling us downstream, and the rope was pulling the kayak toward us. But the kayak was moving upstream, dragging the rope with it. Like something beneath the water was pulling it in the opposite direction. "What the hell?" Travis breathed. The kayak picked up speed, sliding across the water like it was on ice. The rope jerked and snapped taut, nearly pulling Travis overboard. He let go of the rope just in time, and it whipped out of the boat and disappeared into the water. The kayak kept moving upstream, faster now, gliding against the current like it was being reeled in by an invisible line. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped, right back where it had been before. Motionless. Perfectly still. We sat there in the boat, all of us staring at the kayak, none of us saying a word. The river roared around us, but all I could hear was my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Finally, Travis spoke. "I'm calling in a dive team." "A dive team?" I said. "What are they going to find?" "I don't know, but something under that kayak is holding it in place, and I want to know what." The dive team arrived 3 hours later. 2 divers from the county search and rescue unit, both experienced with river diving. They brought their own boat, equipment, and underwater cameras. The lead diver's name was Marcus Fring, a broad-shouldered guy in his 40s who'd spent 20 years diving in conditions that would make most people quit. But even he looked skeptical when we explained the situation. "You're telling me the kayak moved upstream on its own," he said flatly. "We all saw it," Travis confirmed. "Moved against the current. Fast." Marcus exchanged a glance with his partner, a younger woman named Sarah Evans. She looked equally unconvinced. "River currents can do weird things," Sarah said. "Eddies, undertows, pressure differentials. It might have looked like it was moving upstream, but there could be a logical explanation." "Then explain the sand," Mila said. "Dry sand, in the middle of a river." Sarah didn't have an answer for that. Marcus pulled on his wetsuit and checked his gear. "All right, we'll dive down and see what's holding it in place. Probably just snagged on something. But I want everyone to stay in the boats and keep your radios on. If something goes wrong, I need to know you can pull us out." "Understood," I said. The two divers entered the water from their boat and swam toward the kayak. Marcus had a waterproof camera mounted on his helmet, and the feed was being transmitted to a small monitor in Travis's hands. We all crowded around to watch. The water was murky, even with the powerful lights the divers carried. Visibility was maybe 10 feet at best. We could see rocks and sediment drifting past, and occasional flashes of fish darting away from the lights. Marcus reached the kayak first and grabbed the edge to steady himself. The current was strong, and even with his experience, he had to fight to stay in place. He signaled to Sarah, and she joined him, gripping the other side of the kayak. "We're going under," Marcus's voice crackled through the radio. "Looking for whatever's holding this thing." They both took a breath and dove beneath the kayak. The camera feed went dark for a moment, then flickered back on as Marcus's lights adjusted. We could see the underside of the kayak, smooth and yellow, floating just below the surface. And beneath it, nothing. No rocks, no logs, no fishing line or rope. Just empty water and the rocky riverbed about 15 feet down. "I don't see anything," Marcus said, his voice distorted by the water. "No obstructions. The kayak isn't snagged on anything. It's just floating." "That's impossible," Travis said. "The current should be moving it." "I know, but I'm telling you, there's nothing holding it here." Marcus swam deeper, his camera panning across the riverbed. The rocks were smooth and worn, covered in algae and silt. No signs of anything unusual. Then his camera caught something. A hand. It was sticking up out of the sand at the bottom of the river, fingers splayed, palm facing up like it was reaching for the surface. Marcus jerked back, and the camera spun wildly for a moment. "Jesus Christ!" "What?" Travis demanded. "What did you see?" "There's a hand. At the bottom. Someone's buried in the sand." Sarah swam over to Marcus, and together they approached the hand cautiously. As they got closer, we could see more details on the monitor. The hand was pale, almost gray, and there was no movement, no life. Marcus reached out and touched it. The hand crumbled. It didn't pull back or resist. It just fell apart, dissolving into the water like it was made of ash. Within seconds, there was nothing left but a faint cloud of gray particles drifting with the current. "What the hell was that?" Sarah's voice was shaking. Marcus didn't answer. He was staring at the spot where the hand had been, his camera focused on the sand. And as we watched, more of the sand began to shift. Something was moving beneath it. More hands started to emerge. 1, then 2, then 5, then a dozen. They pushed up through the sand like plants sprouting from soil, fingers grasping at the water. Some were whole. Some were just bones. Some crumbled the moment they touched the current. "Get out of there!" Travis shouted into the radio. "Get out now!" But Marcus and Sarah were already swimming. They kicked hard, fighting the current, racing back toward their boat. The hands kept coming, more and more of them, until the entire riverbed was covered in reaching, grasping fingers. And then the kayak started to sink. Slowly at first, then faster. It tilted forward, the nose dipping beneath the surface, and then it was gone, pulled down into the mass of hands below. Marcus and Sarah broke the surface and scrambled into their boat, gasping and shaking. Travis pulled alongside them, and we all stared at the spot where the kayak had been. The water was calm. The hands were gone. The riverbed was just sand and rock again. "Did anyone else see that?" Mila whispered. We all nodded. We'd all seen it on the monitor. Dozens of hands, maybe hundreds, reaching up from the riverbed. And then nothing. Marcus pulled off his diving mask and looked at Travis. "I don't know what that was, but I'm not going back down there, not for anything." "We need to report this," Travis said. His voice was steady, but I could see his hands shaking as he reached for his radio. "Report what?" Sarah asked. "That we saw ghost hands pull a kayak underwater? No one's going to believe us." "We have it on camera," Travis said. "Do we?" Marcus rewound the footage and played it back. The monitor showed him and Sarah swimming toward the kayak. It showed them diving underneath. It showed the empty riverbed. But it didn't show the hands. The monitor showed Marcus reaching toward something, then jerking back. It showed the sand shifting, but the hands themselves were gone from the footage, like they'd never existed. "That's not possible," Sarah said. "We all saw them. They were right there." Marcus checked the camera settings, then played the footage again. Same result. No hands. Just empty water and shifting sand. "The camera must have malfunctioned," he said, but he didn't sound convinced. We sat there in our boats, the current pushing us slowly downstream, all of us trying to process what we'd seen. Or what we thought we'd seen. Finally, Travis spoke. "We need to close this section of the river. No boats, no kayaks, no swimmers, until we figure out what's going on." "And how do we explain it?" I asked. "We don't. We say there's a hazard. Unstable riverbed. Dangerous currents. We don't mention anything else." He was right. If we told people what we'd really seen, they'd think we were crazy. Or worse, they'd come looking for it. We returned to shore and started making calls. Travis contacted the sheriff's office and requested a temporary closure of this section of the Snake River. I called my supervisor and told him we'd found evidence of a potential missing person but needed time to investigate further. By evening, the area was cordoned off. Warning signs were posted along the banks, and a patrol boat was stationed upstream to turn back any boaters who tried to enter the closed section. But as the sun set and the canyon filled with shadow, I couldn't stop thinking about those hands. Where had they come from? Were they real? And if they were real, how many people were buried beneath that sand? Mila and I stayed at the outpost that night. Neither of us wanted to be alone. We sat on the porch of my cabin, watching the last light fade from the canyon rim, and neither of us said much. Finally, Mila broke the silence. "You think whoever was in that kayak is down there?" "I don't know. The fingernail we found, the blood, the bite marks on the paddle, someone was in trouble. Real trouble. I know. And now they're gone, just like all those others." I looked at her. "What others?" She hesitated, then pulled out her phone and started scrolling through something. "I've been doing research. While the dive team was getting ready, I looked up missing person cases in Hell's Canyon. You know how many there have been in the last 20 years? No, 47. 47 people who went into this canyon and never came out. Most of them were ruled accidental drownings, but their bodies were never recovered." I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. 47? And that's just the ones that were reported. How many more do you think there are? People who came out here alone, people with no family to report them missing. Drifters? Runaways? How many people has this river swallowed? I didn't have an answer. but I knew she was right to ask. We sat there until it was full dark, and then Mila went to her cabin and I went to mine. But I didn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the river roar outside my window, and I thought about all those hands reaching up from the sand. Reaching for what? The surface? Air? Help? Or were they trying to pull something down? The next morning, I went back to the river. I had to. I needed to see it in daylight, needed to convince myself that what we'd seen was real and not some shared hallucination. The warning signs were still up, and the patrol boat was still upstream. But the river looked normal, just water and rocks, and the occasional piece of driftwood floating past. I walked along the bank to the spot where we'd found the kayak. There was nothing there now. No yellow shell floating in the current, no impossible stillness. Just the river, moving fast and indifferent. But the sand was still there. I could see it through the clear water, spread across the riverbed in patches. Dry sand, deposited where there should be none. And as I watched, I saw something move beneath it. Just a ripple. Just a slight disturbance in the sand. But it was there. I grabbed a long stick from the bank and reached out towards the sand. The stick barely touched the surface before something grabbed it and yanked it out of my hands. The stick disappeared into the water like it had been swallowed by a mouth. I stumbled back from the edge, my heart pounding. The water was calm again. The sand was still, but I knew what I'd seen. There was something down there, something that didn't want to be disturbed. I radioed Travis and told him what happened. He didn't sound surprised. "Marcus called me this morning," he said. "He's been having nightmares, says he keeps seeing those hands in his sleep. And Sarah won't answer her phone. We need to figure out what this is," I said. "How? We can't dive down there again. We don't have any footage. And even if we did, who's going to believe us?" "I don't care if anyone believes us. I care about keeping people safe. If there's something dangerous in this river, we need to know what it is." Travis was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'll make some calls. See if I can find someone who specializes in this kind of thing." "What kind of thing?" "I don't know. Paranormal? Geological anomaly? Something. There has to be an explanation." But as I stood there on the bank, watching the river flow past, I wasn't so sure. Some things don't have explanations. Some things just are. And whatever was beneath that sand, I had a feeling we'd only seen the beginning of it. 3 days later, Travis called me with a name. Dr. Helena Cross. She was a geologist from Boise State University who specialized in unusual river formations and sediment patterns. Travis had told her we had an anomaly that needed investigating, but he hadn't mentioned the hands or the kayak. He wanted her to see it fresh, without any preconceptions. She arrived the next morning in a university van packed with equipment. Dr. Cross was in her 50s with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She reminded me of a hawk watching for prey. "Show me the site," she said without preamble. Mila and I led her down to the riverbank, to the spot where the kayak had been. The warning signs were still up, but Dr. Cross barely glanced at them. She was already pulling out instruments, measuring devices I didn't recognize. "Describe exactly what you saw," she said as she worked. I told her everything: the kayak, the stillness, the dry sand, the fingernail, the paddle with bite marks, the dive team, and finally, the hands. She didn't laugh or call me crazy. She just listened, nodding occasionally, her eyes never leaving the water. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something I didn't expect. "You're not the first person to report something like this." Mila and I exchanged glances. "What do you mean?" Dr. Cross set down her equipment and turned to face us. "In 1952, A research team from the University of Idaho came to Hell's Canyon to study sediment deposits. They found patches of sand in areas where sand shouldn't exist. Dry sand, sitting at the bottom of a fast-moving river. They documented it, took samples, ran tests, but they couldn't explain it. What happened to them? I asked. 3 of the 5 researchers disappeared, just vanished. Their boat was found drifting empty near the same area you found your kayak. No bodies were ever recovered. A chill ran down my spine. And the other 2? One refused to talk about what happened. He left the university and moved to Alaska. The other wrote a report, but it was never published. It was locked away in the university archives and classified as unreliable due to psychological distress. Do you have a copy of that report? Dr. Cross reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. I made a copy yesterday after Deputy Malloy called me. I think you should read it. She handed me the folder. Inside were yellowed pages, typewritten, with handwritten notes in the margins. The report was dated November 1952, written by a graduate student named Robert Finch. I started reading, and with each sentence, the weight in my chest grew heavier. We began seeing them on the 3rd day of our study, hands beneath the sand. At first, we thought they were rocks or driftwood, but when Thomas reached down to collect a sample, the hand grabbed him. He screamed and pulled away, but it held on. We had to use a knife to cut it loose. The hand crumbled when we brought it to the surface. It looked human, but it fell apart like ash. On the 4th day, the sand began to move. We watched it shift and swirl, even though the current shouldn't have been affecting it. Something was beneath it. Many things. We could see shapes moving, reaching up, always reaching. Thomas wanted to leave. So did Mary. But Dr. Hendricks insisted we continue. He said this was a once-in-a-lifetime discovery. He said we had to document it properly. On the 5th day, Dr. Hendricks went into the water. He wanted samples from the bottom. He said he'd be careful. He said he knew what he was doing. We never saw him again. Thomas and I pulled the boat over to where he'd gone in, but there was nothing. Just sand. So much sand. And beneath it, we could see them. Hundreds of them. Thousands, maybe. All reaching up, fingers grasping at nothing. Mary panicked. She jumped out of the boat and started swimming for shore. I screamed for her to come back, but she wouldn't listen. She was maybe 10 feet from the bank when something grabbed her leg and pulled her under. Thomas tried to save her. He dove in after her. I heard him scream, and then the water went still. I was alone in the boat. The sand was all around me now, rising up from the bottom like smoke. I could feel them beneath me. Waiting, patient, I rowed. I rowed until my arms gave out, and then I rowed some more. I didn't stop until I was miles away, until I couldn't see that cursed section of river anymore. I'm writing this report, but I know no one will believe me. I wouldn't believe me. But it's the truth. There's something in that river. Something old, something hungry, and it's still there, waiting for the next person foolish enough to get too close. The report ended there. I looked up at Dr. Cross, and I could see she'd read it before. "Do you believe it?" I asked. I believe he saw something that traumatized him enough to write this. Whether it was real or some kind of mass hallucination caused by stress or toxins in the water, I can't say. But I do know that the sand is real. I've seen similar deposits in other locations. Rivers in Oregon, lakes in Montana, always in isolated areas, always unexplained. What causes it? Dr. Cross shook her head. I don't know, but I have a theory. There are places in the world where geology does strange things, where the rules we think we understand don't quite apply. Magnetic anomalies, gravitational distortions, time dilation fields. We don't have names for all of them yet, but they exist. You think this is one of those places? I think this canyon is very old, older than most, and I think something happened here a long time ago that left a mark, a scar in the earth itself, and that scar is still bleeding. Mila spoke up for the first time. What about the people? The 47 missing persons? Are they all down there? Dr. Cross looked at the river. I think some of them are. I think this place takes people. It's been taking them for a long time, and it's not going to stop. So what do we do? I asked. You keep this section closed, you keep people away, and you don't go in the water, ever. She started packing up her equipment, and I helped her carry it back to her van. Before she left, she turned to me one last time. Ranger Hale, I've been studying rivers and geological anomalies for 30 years. I've seen things that would make most people question reality, but this place, this is the worst I've encountered. Whatever's down there, it's not natural. It's not even close to natural. And the worst part? What? It's getting stronger. The sand deposits are spreading. 5 years ago, there were 3 patches in this section of the river. Now there are 12. In another 5 years, it could be the entire canyon. She climbed into her van and drove away, leaving Mila and me standing on the empty trail. That was 5 years ago. The section of river is still closed. The warning signs are still up. And I'm still stationed at the outpost, watching over it. The sand has spread, just like Dr. Cross predicted. There are now patches of it visible from the trail, dry and wrong in the middle of all that water. Sometimes, late at night, I can hear sounds coming from the river. Not the roar of the current, but something underneath it. Whispers, maybe, or breathing. It's hard to tell. Mila left after that summer. She said she couldn't stay, couldn't keep watching that stretch of water knowing what was beneath it. I don't blame her. Some nights I think about leaving too. But someone has to stay. Someone has to keep watch. Someone has to make sure no one else gets too close. The kayak was never recovered. Neither was whoever was in it. I added them to the list of missing persons. Another name with no face, another ghost in the canyon. Sometimes I walk down to the bank and stare at the water. I think about all those hands reaching up from the sand. Were they trying to escape? Or were they trying to pull more people down to add to their number? I don't know, and I'm not sure I want to. Last week, a family came through on a rafting trip. They'd ignored the closure signs and paddled right into the restricted section. By the time I reached them, they were already in trouble. Their raft was stuck, motionless in the middle of the current, and the father was in the water trying to push it free. I screamed at them to get back to shore. The mother looked at me like I was crazy, but something in my voice must have gotten through because she started paddling. The father climbed back into the raft, and together they managed to break free and reach the bank. I gave them a citation and a lecture about ignoring warning signs. But I didn't tell them what they'd almost encountered. I didn't tell them about the hands or the sand or the people who never came back. What would be the point? They'd just think I was crazy. But as they paddled away downstream, I saw the father look back at the water one last time, and I saw the expression on his face change. He'd seen something. Just a glimpse, maybe. Just enough to make him wonder. That's the thing about this place. You can try to keep people away. You can put up signs and close the trails and patrol the banks. But the canyon has been here for millions of years, and it'll be here for millions more. And whatever's in that river, it's patient. It can wait. I've been stationed here for 15 years now, and I've seen things I can't explain. But nothing has stayed with me like that empty kayak. The way it floated there, perfectly still, defying physics and reason. The way it moved upstream when we tried to retrieve it. The way it sank into those reaching hands. Sometimes, when I can't sleep, I think about the person who was in that kayak. Were they scared? Did they know what was happening? Did they try to fight, or did they just let go? And I think about the fingernail we found, the one with dried blood, the one that proved someone had been there. Someone had been real, even if they're gone now. I still have it. I kept it in a plastic bag in my desk drawer, evidence of something I can't prove and can't explain. Sometimes I take it out and look at it, and I wonder if somewhere beneath all that sand and water, that person is still down there, still reaching, still waiting. The canyon doesn't give up its dead, it keeps them, and every year it takes more. I'll stay here as long as I can. I'll keep watching the river. I'll keep people away from the closed section, and I'll keep wondering about all those hands beneath the sand. But some nights, when the canyon is dark and the river is loud, I think about Robert Finch's report. I think about his warning. It's still there, waiting for the next person foolish enough to get too close. And I wonder how long it'll be before I become one of them, before I make a mistake, step too close to the water, and feel something grab my ankle and pull me down into the sand. I wonder if I'll reach up too when it happens. If I'll become another hand in the dark, another ghost in the river, another name on the list of people who went into Hell's Canyon and never came back. But until that day comes, I'll keep my watch. I'll stay on the bank. I'll keep my distance from the water. And I'll remember what Dr. Cross told me before she left. It's not natural. It's not even close to natural. And it's getting stronger. The empty kayak was just the beginning. Just another warning. Another sign that something very old and very wrong lives in this canyon. And it's not done taking people yet. Not even close. There are things in the canyons that don't make sense. Things you can't explain, no matter how long you stare at them or how many degrees you've got hanging on your wall. I've been a ranger in Idaho's river country for 12 years now, and I've learned to accept that some questions don't have answers. But the line on the canyon wall, that one still keeps me up at night. My name is Jared Donnelly, and in the summer of 2021, I was working out of a remote station near the Salmon River, just south of where it cuts through some of the deepest canyon country in the state. The walls there rise nearly 5,000 feet straight up from the water, and the river moves fast and cold, fed by snowmelt from the mountains. It's beautiful country, but it's hard country. The kind of place where you can disappear and never be found. The call came in on a Tuesday morning in late July. A hiker had come into the main ranger station at Riggins, about 20 miles north of my post, reporting something strange. The duty ranger there, a guy named Phil Carter, who I'd known for years, gave me the details over the radio. Hiker says he saw something on the canyon wall. Phil's voice crackled through the speaker. Says it looked like a line carved into the rock, but wrong somehow. He couldn't explain it properly, kept saying it didn't look right. What do you mean, didn't look right? I asked. That's what I asked him. He said the line doesn't reflect light. Said he watched it for half an hour, and the light moved across the whole rock face except for that one spot. The line stayed dark. I was quiet for a moment, trying to picture what he was describing. Could be a shadow, or a mineral deposit that absorbs light differently. That's what I thought. But he was pretty insistent. Said he's been hiking these canyons for 15 years and he's never seen anything like it. He marked it on the map. It's in your sector, about 3 miles upriver from your station. You want me to check it out? If you've got time. It's probably nothing, but the guy seemed spooked. I told him I'd send someone to take a look. I told Phil I'd hike out that afternoon and take a look. Truth was, I didn't have much else going on. It was the slow part of summer, after the peak rafting season but before the fall hunters started showing up. A strange line on a canyon wall was more interesting than paperwork. I packed a day pack with water, some trail mix, my camera, and a notebook. I also grabbed my climbing harness and rope, just in case I needed to get closer to whatever this hiker had seen. The canyon walls in that area were steep, but not impossible to climb if you knew what you were doing. The trail followed the river, winding between boulders and scrub pine. The sound of the water was constant, a deep rushing that filled the canyon and drowned out almost everything else. Above me, the rock walls rose in layers of ancient stone, red and gray and black, striped with mineral deposits that had been laid down over millions of years. I'd walked this trail 100 times, but I never got tired of it. There was something about being down in the canyon, surrounded by walls so high they blocked out half the sky, that made you feel small in a good way. Like your problems didn't matter as much when you were dwarfed by something that had been here for eons and would be here long after you were gone. According to the map the hiker had marked, the line was on the north wall, about 200 feet up from the river. I reached the general area after about 40 minutes of hiking and stopped to scan the rock face. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, just the same layered stone I'd been looking at my whole walk. But then the sun shifted slightly, and I caught it. A line, perfectly straight, perfectly horizontal, running across the rock face for maybe 20 feet before disappearing into a shadowed crevice. I pulled out my binoculars and focused on it. The line was thin, maybe the width of a finger, and it looked like it had been drawn or carved onto the rock. But the hiker was right. There was something wrong about it. The line was darker than the surrounding stone, but not in a natural way. It didn't look like a shadow or a vein of different colored rock. It looked like an absence of light, like someone had taken a black marker and drawn a line on the world and the light just stopped at its edges. I stood there for a long time, watching the line as the sun moved across the sky. The light shifted and changed, illuminating different parts of the canyon wall, but the line stayed the same, dark, flat, wrong. I decided I needed to get closer. There was no trail up to that section of wall, but I could see a possible route, a series of ledges and cracks that I could climb if I was careful. I found a solid boulder to anchor my rope, tied off a belay, and started up. The climb wasn't technical, but it was exposed. One slip and I'd tumble 100 feet down onto the rocks below. I took my time, testing each handhold and foothold before committing my weight. The sound of the river faded as I climbed higher, replaced by the scrape of my boots on stone and the occasional cry of a hawk circling overhead. After about 20 minutes, I reached the ledge where the line was. I clipped my harness to a secure anchor point and leaned out to examine it more closely. Up close, the line was even stranger than it had looked from below. It ran perfectly straight across the rock face, about chest height if I'd been standing on level ground. The width was consistent, never varying, never wavering, and the hiker was absolutely right. It didn't reflect light. I held my hand up next to it, watching the sunlight play across my skin. Then I held my hand over the line, blocking the direct sunlight. My hand cast a shadow on the rock, but the line didn't change. It stayed the same flat black, like the presence or absence of light made no difference to it. I reached out and touched it. The rock felt normal, rough, slightly warm from the sun, but the line itself felt exactly the same as the surrounding stone. No difference in texture, no temperature variation. Nothing that would explain why it looked so different. I pulled out my camera and took several photos from different angles with different lighting. Then I grabbed my notebook and made some sketches, noting the exact location and appearance of the line. As I was writing, I heard something that made me stop. A voice, faint, coming from somewhere below me and upstream. I couldn't make out words, just the distant sound of someone calling out. Not panicked, just loud, like someone trying to get someone else's attention. I looked down toward the river but couldn't see anyone. The voice came again, echoing off the canyon walls in a way that made it impossible to pinpoint the direction. I clipped my camera to my harness and started climbing down. If someone was in trouble, I needed to get to them. The line could wait. It took me 15 minutes to reach the bottom. By the time my boots hit the trail, the voice had stopped. The canyon was quiet again except for the river. I called out, "Hello? Anyone out here?" No response. I walked along the trail, heading upstream in the direction I thought the voice had come from. After about a quarter mile, I found something that made my stomach tighten. A backpack. It was sitting on a flat rock just off the trail, positioned carefully like someone had set it down intentionally. But there was no one around, no footprints in the loose dirt, no sign of anyone. I approached cautiously. The backpack was a standard hiking model, dark blue with gray straps. Not new, but not falling apart either. I called out again, louder this time. "This is Park Ranger Donnelly. If this is your pack, please respond." Nothing. I opened the pack. Inside were the usual items: a water bottle, some energy bars, a lightweight jacket, sunscreen, a map. There was also a wallet in the front pocket. I pulled it out and opened it. The driver's license belonged to a man named David Kern, age 32, address in Boise. The photo showed a thin guy with dark hair and a nervous smile. I radioed it in to Phil. "Got a possible missing person. Found an abandoned backpack near mile marker 7, Salmon River North Trail. Driver's license identifies the owner as David Kern from Boise. No sign of the owner in the immediate area." Phil's response was immediate. "Copy that. I'll run the name and see if anyone's filed a missing person report. You want backup?" "Not yet. I'm going to search the immediate area. I'll call if I find anything." I spent the next 2 hours searching. I walked up and down the trail, checking side paths and scanning the river for any sign of someone in the water. I called out every few minutes, listening for a response that never came. The canyon was empty, except for me. As the sun started to drop behind the western rim, turning the canyon into a bowl of shadow, I hiked back to the backpack. I'd have to bring it back to the station, log it as evidence, and file a report. But something about the whole situation bothered me. The backpack had been placed carefully on that rock. Not dropped or tossed aside. Placed, like someone had set it down with the intention of coming back for it. But where had they gone, and why hadn't they responded to my calls? I shouldered the backpack and started hiking back toward the station. As I walked, I kept thinking about that voice I'd heard while I was up on the wall. Had that been David Kern? Had he been calling for help? And if so, why hadn't I found him? I passed the spot where I'd climbed up to examine the line. In the failing light, I could barely make it out on the canyon wall. Just a thin, dark slash across the stone, almost invisible in the shadow. I stopped and stared at it for a long moment. Something about the timing bothered me. I'd heard the voice right after touching the line, right after examining it up close. Coincidence? Probably. But as I stood there in the growing darkness, listening to the river rush past and staring up at that impossible black line on the canyon wall, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. And it was only going to get worse. By the time I got back to the ranger station, it was full dark. The station was a small log building perched on a rocky outcrop overlooking the river, equipped with a radio setup, a small office, and living quarters barely big enough for a cot and a hot plate. It wasn't fancy, but it was home during the season. I set David Kern's backpack on my desk and called Phil on the radio. "Any word on Kern?" I asked. "Nothing yet. No missing person reports filed. I called the Boise PD and gave them his info, but they said there's no report of him being missing. As far as they're concerned, he's just on a hiking trip." "His pack was just sitting there, Phil, carefully placed, and I heard someone calling out right before I found it." "You think he's in trouble?" I don't know, but something feels off. You want me to send a search team in the morning? I thought about it. A full search and rescue operation was expensive and time-consuming. If David Kern had just wandered off the trail to take a piss and forgot where he left his pack, we'd look like idiots. But if he was hurt or lost, every hour mattered. Let me go out again at first light, I said. Do a more thorough search. If I don't find anything by noon, we'll call in SR. All right, be careful out there, Jared. I spent the evening going through the contents of Kern's backpack more carefully, looking for any clue about where he might have gone. The map in his pack had several spots marked with pencil, including the area where I'd found the pack. But there was one other mark that caught my attention. It was right where the line on the canyon wall was located. Someone had drawn a small X at that exact spot, with a note in tiny handwriting. Saw it again. Need to document. Saw it again? That meant Kern had been to this area before. And whatever it was, he thought it was important enough to come back and document. I found something else in his pack. A small waterproof notebook tucked into a side pocket. The pages were filled with handwritten notes, sketches, and measurements. All of them related to the line. The earliest entry was dated April 2019. First sighting, north wall, approximately 200 feet elevation. Line appears to be 18 feet 4 inches in length. Does not match any known geological formation patterns. Planning return trip with better equipment. There were entries from multiple visits over the following 2 years. Each one documented the line in meticulous detail. Measurements, photos, observations about lighting conditions, weather, time of day. Kern had been obsessed with this thing, studying it from every possible angle. But what caught my attention were the later entries, the ones from this year. March 2021. Line has extended. Now measures 19 feet 7 inches. Growth of approximately 15 inches since first observation. This shouldn't be possible. May 2021. Line now 20 feet 2 inches. Growth is accelerating. Brought sample kit, but unable to collect material. Line doesn't respond to scraping or drilling. It's like trying to cut through shadow. June 2021. Line measures 20 feet 9 inches. Growth confirmed. Something is happening here. Found references in old mining reports from 1890s. Prospectors reported dark marks on canyon walls that moved. They abandoned the area, called it cursed. The final entry was dated 3 days ago. July 2021. This is my last trip. Line is now over 21 feet and I've measured a vertical component in the chimney above it. They're connected. It's not multiple lines, it's one line, running through the rock. I need to see where it goes. If I'm right about this, if what I've found is real, it changes everything. Mom, if you're reading this, I'm sorry. I had to know. I set the notebook down, my hands shaking slightly. David Kern had known the line was growing. He'd documented it, and he'd gone back one more time to follow it, to see where it led. And now he was gone. I thought about those old mining reports he'd mentioned. Prospectors in the 1890s seeing dark marks that moved. I'd heard stories about the old miners, how superstitious they'd been, how they'd abandon perfectly good claims because of bad feelings or strange occurrences. I'd always thought those were just stories, tall tales told over campfires. Now, I wasn't so sure. I pulled out my own photos of the line and spread them across the desk. In the harsh light of the station's fluorescent bulbs, the line looked less strange. Just a dark mark on rock. But I remembered how it had looked in person, how the light had seemed to stop at its edges. I opened my laptop and started searching for any information about unusual markings or phenomena in the Salmon River Canyon area. Most of what I found was standard geology. information about the rock layers, the formation of the canyon, the mineral deposits common to the region. But then I found something interesting. A blog post from 2018, written by a geology enthusiast who'd been exploring the area. The post was titled "Anomalies in the Salmon River Canyon," and it described several unusual features the author had noticed during their trips. One of those features was a non-reflective linear anomaly on the north wall of the canyon. I sat up straighter and read more carefully. The line appears to be approximately 20 feet in length, running horizontally across the rock face at an elevation of roughly 200 feet above the river. Multiple visits at different times of day and different seasons have confirmed that the line does not reflect light in the same manner as the surrounding stone. Attempts to photograph the anomaly have been partially successful, though the line appears less pronounced in photographs than when observed directly. The blog post included a photo. It was grainy and taken from a distance, but I could see it, that same dark line cutting across the canyon wall. The author had a theory. While I'm not a professional geologist, I hypothesize that this may be a mineral vein with unusual optical properties, possibly related to the high concentration of manganese oxide found in this region. Further study is needed. The post had 3 comments. One was from another hiker who said they'd seen the same thing. Another was from someone claiming it was just a shadow. The third comment was what made my blood run cold. It was dated 6 months ago, and it was from someone with the username dkern82. I've been researching this line for 2 years now. It's not a mineral deposit. I have proof. Planning another trip this summer to gather more evidence. If anyone wants to collaborate, contact me. David Kern had been researching the line. He'd been out here multiple times, documenting it, trying to figure out what it was. And now he was missing. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. This was getting stranger by the minute. A guy obsessed with a weird line on a canyon wall disappears in the exact area where the line is located. His pack is found carefully placed, but there's no sign of him. I needed to talk to someone who knew more about this kind of thing. Someone who could tell me if there was any scientific explanation for what I was seeing. I remembered that Ian Brecker, another ranger I'd worked with a few years back, had transferred to a station up near the middle fork of the Salmon River. Ian had a degree in geology before he'd become a ranger, and he knew the canyon country better than almost anyone. I pulled out my phone, but there was no signal. Out here, cell service was non-existent. I'd have to use the radio and hope he was near his station. I tried his frequency. Static for a moment, then his voice came through. Ian Brecker. Ian, it's Jared Donnelly down on the Salmon River South sector. You got a minute? Jared, yeah, I got time. What's up? I told him about the line, about the hiker's report, my climb up to examine it, the strange way it didn't reflect light. I didn't mention David Kern yet. I wanted to hear what Ian thought about the line first. There was a long silence after I finished. Then Ian said, "You said it's perfectly straight and doesn't reflect light?" "Yeah, like the light just stops at its edges." "Huh, that's weird. Can you send me photos?" "I can try, but the photos don't really show it right. It's something you have to see in person. What's the rock composition there?" "Standard for this area. Layers of basalt and rhyolite, some sandstone. Nothing unusual as far as I know, so..." Ian was quiet again, and I could almost hear him thinking. Finally, he said, "I've heard of optical phenomena caused by certain mineral arrangements, but nothing that would create a perfectly straight line like that. And the fact that it doesn't reflect light at all is really strange. Even the darkest minerals still interact with light in some way. Could it be man-made? Like someone painted it or carved it? On a canyon wall 200 feet up? Seems unlikely. And you said you touched it. Did it feel like paint or any kind of coating? No, felt like normal rock. Then I don't know, man. That's bizarre. You said it's about 20 feet long? Yeah, runs horizontal and then disappears into a crevice. I'd like to come down and take a look at it, maybe bring some equipment, do some tests. Would that be all right? Absolutely, but there's something else you should know. I told him about David Kern, the abandoned backpack, the voice I'd heard, the blog post, the comment about having proof. Ian whistled low. And so this guy was obsessed with the line, and now he's missing right where the line is located. Yeah. You think the two things are connected? I don't know, but it's a hell of a coincidence. All right. I'm going to pack some gear and head your way first thing tomorrow morning. It'll take me about 4 hours to get there. In the meantime, stay away from that wall. If there's any chance this is connected to a missing person, we need to treat it like a crime scene. Copy that. I'll be here. After I signed off with Ian, I sat in the station for a long time, staring at the photos of the line and thinking about David Kern. What had he been looking for? What proof had he claimed to have? And more importantly, where the hell was he? I decided to get some sleep. I'd be up before dawn to start another search, and I needed to be sharp. But as I lay on my cot, listening to the river rush past in the darkness outside, sleep didn't come easily. I kept thinking about that voice I'd heard, the way it had echoed through the canyon, bouncing off the walls until I couldn't tell where it was coming from. Had that been David Kern calling out? Had he been right there, maybe 50 yards away, while I was up on the wall looking at that line? And if so, why hadn't I found him? Around midnight, I finally drifted off. But my sleep was restless, filled with dreams of dark lines crawling across stone, spreading like cracks in glass, reaching out like fingers. I was up before dawn, as promised. I made coffee on my hot plate, forced down some instant oatmeal, and packed my gear. This time I brought more equipment: extra rope, a first aid kit, flares, and a portable spotlight. If I was going to search the area thoroughly, I needed to be prepared. The sky was just starting to lighten as I headed out, the canyon walls still dark silhouettes against the pale sky. The air was cold, and mist hung over the river like smoke. I reached the area where I'd found Kern's pack and started a systematic search pattern, moving and expanding circles from that point. I checked every alcove, every crevice, every pile of rocks large enough to hide a person. I called out regularly, listening for any response. Nothing. By the time the sun had fully risen, I'd covered about a square mile. No sign of David Kern. No more abandoned gear. No footprints. Nothing. I was starting to think he'd somehow made it out of the canyon on his own when I noticed something. On the canyon wall, about 30 feet to the left of where the line was, there were marks on the rock. Fresh marks. Scrapes and gouges that looked like they'd been made by climbing equipment. Someone had climbed up there recently. I looked up at the line, then back at the marks. They led in the same direction, following a route similar to the one I'd taken yesterday. David Kern had climbed up to the line. But had he made it back down? I started following the climbing marks, looking for more signs of recent activity. About 50 feet to the left of the line, I found something that made my stomach drop. A climbing anchor. It was drilled into the rock, professional grade, with a carabiner still attached. The rope that should have been clipped to it was gone. I radioed Phil immediately. I found climbing equipment, professional setup. The rope is missing. I think Kern climbed up to that line and something happened to him while he was up there. You think he fell? I don't know, but I'm going to climb up there again and take a look. Wait for Ian to get there, Phil urged. You shouldn't be climbing alone. He was right, but I couldn't shake the feeling that every minute mattered. If Kern had fallen and was injured somewhere on that wall, he might not have much time. I'll be careful, I said. but I'm going up. I used my own rope to belay up, following the same route I'd taken yesterday. As I climbed, I kept scanning the rock face for any sign of Kern or his equipment. I reached the ledge where the line was and immediately saw that something had changed. The line was longer. Yesterday, it had been about 20 feet long, running horizontally until it disappeared into a shadowed crevice. Now, it extended out of that crevice for another 10 feet, perfectly straight, perfectly dark. The line had grown. I stood there on the ledge staring at it, my mind trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Lines didn't grow. They were static features, carved or painted or formed by geological processes. They didn't extend themselves overnight. Unless David Kern had been right. Unless this wasn't a static feature at all. I pulled out my camera and took photos, comparing them to the ones from yesterday. There was no doubt. The line was longer, and the growth matched what Kern had documented in his notebook. Slow, but steady, a few inches at a time, accelerating with each measurement. I pulled out Kern's notebook from my pack and flipped to his sketches. He'd drawn the line from multiple angles, with precise measurements and annotations. His last sketch showed the line at 21 feet 3 inches. I took out my measuring tape and carefully extended it along the line. 21 feet, 11 inches. 8 inches of growth in 3 days. My hands were shaking as I wrote the measurement in my own notebook. This was real. This was documented. Whatever this thing was, it was active, and it was spreading. I noticed something else. Where the line had extended, the rock looked different. Not damaged or marked, but somehow changed. The texture was wrong. I ran my fingers along the stone next to the line, then over the section where it had grown. The rock felt the same, rough, slightly warm from the sun, but visually it was different, like the line had erased some essential quality of the stone, leaving behind a surface that was technically rock, but fundamentally wrong. I thought about what Kern had written in his notebook. It's like trying to cut through shadow. That's exactly what it looked like. Not a mark on the rock, but an absence carved into it. A place where light went to die. I reached out toward the new section of the line, but before my fingers made contact, I heard it again. The voice. This time it was louder, clearer, and it was coming from above me. I looked up. About 50 feet higher, there was a narrow chimney, a vertical crack in the rock that climbed towards the canyon rim. The voice was coming from up there. "Hello?" I called out. "David Kern?" The voice came again. Not words, just a sound. A cry, maybe. Or a moan, it was hard to tell. I started climbing toward it. The chimney was technical, requiring me to wedge my body between the rock faces and inch upward using my back and feet. It was slow going, and my muscles burned with the effort. The technique is called chimneying. You press your back against one wall and your feet against the opposite wall, then inch upward in a sort of controlled shuffle. It's exhausting, even in the best conditions, and these weren't the best conditions. The walls were smooth in places, offering little friction, and the chimney narrowed and widened unpredictably, forcing me to constantly adjust my position. As I climbed, the voice continued, sometimes loud, sometimes fading to almost nothing. Always coming from above. But now that I was in the chimney, I could hear something else underneath the voice. A low vibration, almost below the threshold of hearing. It was coming from the rock itself, like the stone was humming. I'd felt something similar once before, years ago, standing next to a high-voltage transformer. The air had buzzed with energy, making my teeth ache and my skin prickle. This felt like that, but wrong, not electricity, something else. Sweat was running down my back, and my legs were starting to shake from the exertion. I stopped to rest, wedging myself securely in the chimney and taking a few deep breaths. That's when I noticed the temperature. It was getting colder. Not dramatically, but noticeably. The higher I climbed, the cooler the air became, which didn't make sense. Heat rises. The higher I went, the warmer it should be, especially with the sun beating down on the canyon wall. But it was getting colder. I looked down and saw the horizontal line on the ledge below me, that impossible dark slash across the stone. Then I looked up, and my breath caught in my throat. I reached a small ledge about 40 feet up and pulled myself onto it, breathing hard. The chimney continued above me, but the voice had stopped. I called out again, "David, are you up there?" Silence, and then I saw it. Another line. This one was vertical, running down the chimney wall from somewhere above. It was the same as the horizontal line, perfectly straight, perfectly dark, absorbing light instead of reflecting it. And it was moving, not fast, but I could see it. If I stayed very still and watched carefully, the line was extending downward, millimeter by millimeter, like something was drawing it in real time. I pressed myself against the opposite wall of the chimney and watched in horror as the line grew. It moved smoothly, never wavering, never breaking. A finger width of pure darkness crawling down the rock face toward me. And then I understood. This wasn't a line carved into the rock. This wasn't a mineral deposit or an optical illusion. This was something else, something that didn't belong here, something that was spreading. I needed to get down. Now. I started descending as quickly as I dared, but the technical climbing slowed me down. Behind me, above me, I could feel the line growing. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see how close it was. I was maybe 10 feet from the bottom of the chimney when I heard a sound that stopped me cold. A crack, loud and sharp, like a gunshot echoing through the canyon. I looked down and saw the horizontal line, the one I'd been examining for the past 2 days. It was splitting. A fracture was spreading out from the line, spiderwebbing across the rock face. And wherever the cracks went, the rock changed. Lost its texture, its color, its substance. Became flat and dark and wrong. The rock wasn't breaking, it was being erased. I abandoned caution and half climbed, half fell the rest of the way down to the ledge. My hands were shaking as I clipped into my belay rope and started rappelling down to the canyon floor. I was halfway down when I heard the voice again. This time, I recognized what it was. It wasn't someone calling for help. It wasn't someone lost or injured. It was the canyon itself. The sound of rock grinding against rock. The sound of stone under impossible stress. The sound of something ancient and solid being unmade. I hit the ground hard and unclipped from my rope. Above me, the cracks were spreading faster now. The entire section of wall where the line had been was changing, losing definition, becoming a flat, dark expanse that hurt to look at. And then, with no warning, a section of rock the size of a truck detached from the wall and fell. It didn't fall the way rock should fall. It didn't tumble or bounce. It dropped straight down, silent, and when it hit the ground 50 yards away from me, it didn't shatter. It disappeared. One moment it was there, tons of stone plummeting toward the earth. The next moment, nothing. Just a faint shimmer in the air where it had been, and then even that was gone. I ran. I grabbed my gear and ran down the trail, away from the wall, away from the lines and the cracks and whatever the hell was happening to the rock face behind me. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out, and then I ran some more. When I finally stopped, I was almost back at the ranger station. I bent over, hands on my knees, gasping for air. Behind me, the canyon was quiet. The sound of the river, the whisper of wind, nothing else. I turned and looked back upriver, toward where the line had been. From this distance, I couldn't see the wall clearly, but I could see a patch of darkness on the canyon face, like a shadow that didn't match the angle of the sun. And it was bigger than it had been. Ian arrived 3 hours later. I was sitting on the porch of the ranger station, still trying to process what I'd seen, when I heard his truck coming down the access road. He climbed out, took one look at my face, and said, "What happened?" I told him everything, the extended line, the voice that wasn't a voice, the vertical line in the chimney, the cracks spreading across the rock face, the section of wall that had fallen and disappeared. He listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious with each detail. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Show me." We drove upriver in his truck, parking at the closest access point to the trail. As we walked, I kept expecting him to tell me I was crazy, that I'd misunderstood what I'd seen, that there had to be a logical explanation. But he didn't say any of that. He just walked, his eyes scanning the canyon walls, his face grim. When we reached the area, we both stopped and stared. The dark patch I'd seen from the station was bigger up close, much bigger. It covered almost the entire section of wall where the line had been, a roughly circular area maybe 40 feet across, and it was still growing. Ian pulled out his camera and started taking photos. He shot from multiple angles with different lenses, different settings. Then he pulled out something that looked like a Geiger counter. "What's that?" I asked. "Electromagnetic field detector. If there's any kind of anomalous energy associated with this thing, this should pick it up." He walked toward the base of the dark patch, holding the detector in front of him. The device was silent for the first 20 feet. Then, as he got closer, it started making noise. Not a steady beep, a fluctuating hum that rose and fell in pitch, almost musical. Ian stopped. "That's weird. What is it detecting?" "I don't know. The readings don't match anything I've seen before. It's like..." He paused, frowning at the screen. "It's like the electromagnetic field is collapsing, like there's less energy here than there should be." "How is that possible?" "It's not. Energy doesn't just disappear. It converts or transfers, but it doesn't vanish." He looked up at the dark patch on the wall. "But according to this, that area up there is registering lower than background radiation, lower than empty space, which doesn't make any sense." We spent the next hour documenting everything we could. Ian took measurements, collected samples from the base of the wall, and made detailed notes. I took photos and videos, trying to capture the unnatural flatness of the dark patch, the way it seemed to swallow light. As we worked, the patch grew. Not quickly, but steadily. I could see it if I looked away and then looked back. The edges extending outward, millimeter by millimeter, eating away at the canyon wall. "We need to close this entire section," Ian said finally. "Nobody should be near this thing until we understand what it is." "Agreed. But what do we tell people? What the hell is this?" "I have no idea, but I know someone who might. Dr. Margaret Torres at Idaho State. She specializes in unusual geological phenomena. I'll send her all this data and see what she says." We were packing up our equipment when I saw something that made me freeze. There were marks on the ground near the base of the wall. Footprints. Fresh footprints, leading right up to the dark patch and then stopping. "Ian," I said quietly, "look at this." He came over and knelt by the prints. They were clearly visible in the soft dirt. Hiking boots, men's size, probably 9 or 10. David Kern's size. The prints led straight to the wall, then vanished. No prints leading away. No sign of anyone turning around or walking in another direction. Just a trail of footprints that ended at the edge of the darkness. Ian looked up at the dark patch, then back at the footprints. His face had gone pale. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "You think he walked into it?" "I don't know. But where else would he have gone?" We both stared at the footprints for a long moment, neither of us wanting to say what we were both thinking. David Kern hadn't disappeared into the canyon. He hadn't fallen off a cliff or drowned in the river. He'd walked into the darkness on the wall, and the darkness had taken him. "We need to leave," Ian said, standing up abruptly. "Right now. We can come back with more people, more equipment, but we shouldn't be here alone." I didn't argue. The way the dark patch seemed to pull at my eyes, the way the air felt wrong near it, everything about this situation screamed danger. We hiked back to the truck in silence. As we drove away, I looked in the side mirror and saw the dark patch on the canyon wall, a spreading stain against the ancient stone. And I swear, just before we rounded the bend and it disappeared from view, I saw it pulse. Just once. A ripple that spread out from the center, like something had dropped into still water. Back at the station, Ian called Dr. Torres and sent her all the data he'd collected. While we waited for her response, we sat on the porch and watched the sun drop behind the canyon rim. "You ever see anything like this before?" I asked. Ian shook his head. "Never, and I've been all over the western states. Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, Utah. Seen plenty of weird geological features, but nothing like this. What do you think it is?" "Honestly, I don't think it's geological at all. I think it's something else." "Like what?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You ever heard of Vantablack?" "No." "It's a substance made of carbon nanotubes, the darkest material ever created. It absorbs 99.9% of light. When you look at an object coated in Vantablack, you can't see any depth or dimension. It just looks like a flat black void." "You think someone coated the canyon wall with this Vantablack stuff?" "No, but I think maybe that's what it looks like. Something that absorbs light so completely that it appears to have no dimension. Like a hole in space. But it's growing. Yeah, that's the part I can't explain." My radio crackled to life. Phil's voice came through. "Jared, you there?" "Yeah, Phil, what's up?" "Just got a call from a rafting group. They were coming down the Salmon River this afternoon, and they said they saw something strange on the canyon wall. A dark patch that looked like a shadow, but wrong somehow. Said it made them nervous enough that they stopped early and hiked out to call it in." Ian and I looked at each other. "Where were they?" I asked. "About 2 miles upstream from your location." 2 miles upstream. The darkness was spreading. Not just growing on the wall where it had started, but appearing in new locations. Multiple patches, all growing, all consuming the stone around them. "Phil, we need to close the entire canyon, right now. Nobody goes in or out until we figure out what this is." "That's a big call, Jared. We're talking about shutting down one of the most popular rafting rivers in the state, in the middle of peak season." "I don't care. This thing is dangerous. It's spreading. And I think it took David Kern." There was a long pause. Then Phil said, "All right, I'll make the calls. But you better be right about this." "I am." After I signed off, Ian's phone buzzed. He read the message, and his face went even paler than before. "What?" I asked. Dr. Torres. She says she needs to see this in person. She's driving out tonight. But she also sent me something else." He turned his phone so I could see the screen. It was an image. A satellite photo of the Salmon River Canyon taken earlier that day. There were dark spots visible on multiple sections of the canyon walls. 6 of them, maybe more, all roughly circular, all growing. "My God," I whispered. "It's not just one, there are multiple sites." "And according to this," Ian said, zooming in on the image, They're all in a roughly straight line, like they're connected somehow. I thought about the horizontal line I'd first seen, the way it had been perfectly straight, the way it had extended into the crevice and then appeared again on the other side. What if it wasn't just a line on one section of wall? What if it was one continuous line, running through the rock itself, hidden behind tons of stone? What if the dark patches were just the places where the line had broken through to the surface? Ian, I said slowly, what if this isn't multiple things? What if it's one thing? Something under the rock, something that's been there for a long time and now it's coming up. He stared at the satellite image for a long moment. Then he said, "If that's true, then we have a much bigger problem than a few patches on canyon walls." How big? If there's something beneath the entire canyon that's causing this, something that extends for miles, then closing a few sections of river isn't going to stop it. Nothing is going to stop it. We sat in silence as darkness filled the canyon. The river continued its eternal rush, indifferent to the impossible thing happening on its walls. Above us, stars began to appear, cold and distant. And, somewhere in the darkness, spreading slowly but inevitably, something ancient and wrong was unmaking the canyon itself. Dr. Torres arrived just after midnight. She was a small woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and eyes that seemed to notice everything. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Show me," she said. Even in the dark, with only our flashlights and the moon to see by, the dark patches were visible. They didn't reflect our light. They absorbed it, creating pools of absolute darkness against the canyon wall. Dr. Torres approached one of the patches slowly, holding some kind of scanning device in front of her. She didn't speak, just moved methodically, taking readings, making notes. After about 20 minutes, she stepped back and turned to us. "This isn't geological," she said flatly. "What is it?" Ian asked. "I don't know, but I can tell you what it's not. It's not a mineral deposit. It's not an optical illusion. It's not any kind of natural phenomenon I've ever encountered in 40 years of studying rocks. Then what could cause it?" She was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "The readings I'm getting are impossible. This area has a lower energy state than the vacuum of space. It's like..." She paused, struggling to find the right words. "It's like something is erasing reality itself, taking matter and energy and reducing them to nothing." "Can we stop it?" I asked. "I don't know if we can even slow it down. But we need to evacuate the canyon, everyone, now. If this continues spreading at its current rate, in a week, this entire section of the canyon will be gone." "Gone where?" She looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never expected to see from a scientist. "Fear. Nowhere," she said. "Just gone, erased, like it never existed." They evacuated the canyon. It took 3 days to get everyone out. Rafters, hikers, kayakers, the handful of people who lived in remote cabins along the river. They were moved to temporary shelters in Riggins and Salmon, told there was a geological emergency and they needed to stay out until further notice. The evacuation was chaos. Some people refused to leave, convinced this was government overreach or a land grab. Others left willingly but demanded explanations we couldn't give. How do you tell someone that reality is unraveling on their favorite hiking trail? One old-timer, a guy who'd been guiding rafting trips on the Salmon River for 40 years, laughed when he heard about the dark patches. "My grandfather told me stories about those," he said. "Said the old ones knew about them. Said they used to mark the boundaries between the world we can see and the world we can't. Said you never go near them." "Did your grandfather say what they were?" I asked. "Nope, just said they were old. Older than the mountains, older than the river. Said they've always been here, sleeping. and the smartest thing a man can do is let them sleep. But it was too late for that now. Whatever had been sleeping was awake. The authorities tried to keep it quiet, but word spread anyway. You can't evacuate an entire canyon and expect people not to ask questions. News crews showed up, asking for interviews. We turned them away, but that just made them more curious. Social media exploded with theories: government conspiracy, alien activity, secret military testing. Some people claimed we were covering up a toxic spill. Others said it was a natural gas leak or radiation from old uranium mines. Nobody guessed the truth. How could they? The truth was too strange, too impossible. I stayed at the ranger station, keeping watch. Ian stayed with me. Dr. Torres came and went, bringing equipment, taking measurements, trying to understand what we were dealing with. The dark patches continued to grow. New ones appeared. Within a week, there were 37 visible sites. Within 2 weeks, over 100. The canyon was being erased piece by piece, and there was nothing we could do to stop it. On the 15th day, we got word that David Kern's family had been notified. His sister came to the station demanding to know what happened to her brother. I told her what I could, that he'd been investigating an anomaly on the canyon wall, that his footprints led right up to one of the dark patches, that he'd vanished without a trace. She didn't believe me. She thought we were covering up an accident, that he'd fallen or drowned and we were lying to avoid responsibility. "My brother was careful," she said, her voice shaking with anger and grief. "He was an experienced hiker. He knew these canyons better than anyone. He wouldn't just disappear." I showed her his notebook, the measurements, the sketches, the documentation of the line's growth over 2 years. She read through it in silence, her hands trembling. When she looked up, her eyes were red. "He told me he was onto something big," she said quietly. "Something that would change how we understand the world." I thought he was being dramatic. David was always like that, always chasing mysteries, always convinced he was on the verge of some great discovery. "He was right," I said. "He found something real. But it killed him." I didn't know what to say to that. She was right, the line had killed him, or taken him, or erased him. Whatever had happened to David Kern, he was gone because he'd gotten too close to something that shouldn't be disturbed. But as she was leaving, she said something that stuck with me. David was convinced he'd found something important. He said the line was a message, a warning carved by people who lived here thousands of years ago. He said they knew something we didn't, and they were trying to tell us. A warning. I thought about that for a long time after she left. I thought about the old-timer's story, about boundaries between worlds. I thought about the miners who'd abandoned their claims in the 1890s, calling the area cursed. What if they'd all seen it? What if the line had always been here, appearing and disappearing over centuries, a recurring phenomenon that ancient peoples had learned to recognize and avoid? I thought about that later, standing on the porch of the station, watching the canyon fill with darkness as more patches appeared. What if David Kern had been right? What if the line had been carved there deliberately, marking something dangerous? Something that should never be disturbed? And what if, by examining it, by touching it, by trying to understand it, we'd woken something up? 3 weeks after I'd first climbed up to look at that line, I stood at the rim of the canyon and looked down at what remained. Whole sections of the wall were gone now. Not collapsed, not eroded, just gone. Replaced by flat, black voids that hurt to look at. The river still flowed, though parts of it now ran through sections of nothing, disappearing into darkness, and then emerging downstream as if the missing rock had never existed. Dr. Torres had theories. Something about quantum decay, about the breakdown of matter at a fundamental level, but even she admitted she was guessing. Ian had stopped taking measurements. What was the point? The numbers didn't make sense and nothing we could do would stop the spread. The canyon was dying. Piece by piece, stone by stone, it was being unmade. And all I could think about was David Kern, walking toward that dark patch, his footprints ending at its edge. Had he known what would happen? Had he understood in those final moments what the line really was? Or had he walked forward expecting answers, only to find oblivion? I'll never know. The canyon is closed now, permanently. Fences have been erected, warning signs posted. The authorities have classified it as an environmental disaster, though they still don't know how to explain what's happening. I left the Ranger Service after that summer. Couldn't stay, couldn't look at those walls anymore, knowing what was growing on them, what was spreading through the stone like a disease. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder if it's still spreading, if the darkness has consumed the entire canyon yet, if it's moved beyond the canyon, reaching into new rock, new stone, new places. And I wonder if there are other lines out there, other markings, other warnings we've ignored. The line on the canyon wall wasn't trying to tell us something about the past. It was trying to warn us about what was coming, and we didn't listen. Some things you find in the wilderness stay with you, not because they're particularly strange or frightening, but because they're wrong in a way you can't quite explain. Like a sentence with a word missing, or a photograph where the shadows don't line up with the light source. Your brain knows something's off, but it can't tell you what. That's how I felt standing in that campsite, staring at two folding chairs set up beside a cold fire pit. One chair was bone dry, the other was soaking wet. My name is Troy Laramie, and I've been a park ranger in Idaho's canyon country for 8 years. I work primarily out of a station near Hell's Canyon, where the Snake River cuts through some of the deepest gorges in North America. It's beautiful, brutal country, the kind of place where nature doesn't compromise and mistakes get punished fast. The call came in on a Thursday morning in late August. A rafting group had reported seeing what looked like an abandoned camp deep in a restricted section of the canyon, about 15 miles downstream from the nearest put-in point. They hadn't stopped to investigate, smart of them, but they'd marked the location on their GPS and called it in when they reached the takeout. Probably just some gear left behind, my supervisor said over the radio. But check it out. If someone's camping in a restricted zone, we need to know about it. I took one of the park service boats and headed downriver. The morning was cool and clear, with that particular quality of light you only get in late summer, sharp and golden, making every rock and tree stand out in perfect detail. The river was running low after the hot season, exposing gravel bars and boulders that spent most of the year underwater. As I navigated downstream, the canyon walls rose higher on either side, blocking out more and more of the sky. This section was restricted for good reason. No established camps, no maintained trails, and the river ran through a series of technical rapids that had claimed more than a few boats over the years. The people who came through here were experienced river runners, and even they treated it with respect. According to the GPS coordinates, the camp was on the north bank, in a section where the canyon narrowed to maybe 200 feet across. The walls on both sides rose nearly 4,000 feet straight up, sheer cliffs of dark basalt that seemed to lean in over the water. I spotted the camp from about 50 yards out. 2 folding chairs, a fire ring, a tarp strung between some rocks to create a crude shelter, and a raft pulled up on the gravel bar. I brought my boat alongside the raft and killed the engine. The sudden silence was oppressive. Down here, The canyon walls blocked so much sound that even the river seemed muted. Just a low, constant rush that was more felt than heard. I tied off my boat and stepped onto the gravel bar. The raft was a standard model, 16 feet, self-bailing, the kind you'd rent from any outfitter. It looked new, with minimal wear on the tubes. The registration number on the side was still clearly visible. I walked over to the camp. The tarp shelter was set up properly, with good knots and proper tension. Whoever had made this camp knew what they were doing, but the camp had an abandoned feel to it, that particular stillness that settles over a place when humans have left and nature hasn't quite moved back in yet. I stood at the edge of the camp for a moment, taking it all in. Everything was too neat, too organized. When people leave a camp in a hurry, they leave chaos. Gear scattered, tent partially collapsed, food left out. But this camp looked like someone had carefully arranged everything and then simply walked away. The tarp was stretched tight between 4 rocks, creating a shelter about 8 feet square. Underneath, the ground was clear of debris. Someone had swept it clean before setting up. 2 sleeping pads were laid out side by side, still in their stuff sacks. A small camp stove sat on a flat rock, the fuel canister attached, but the valve closed. I checked the stove. The fuel canister was half full. I unscrewed it and sniffed. Fresh camp fuel, not old or contaminated. Someone had been planning to use this, maybe cook dinner, but they'd never gotten around to it. Near the stove, I found a small dry bag. Inside were matches, a lighter, fire starter cubes, and a waterproof notebook. I flipped through the notebook. It was a trip log. Michael Voss's handwriting, neat and precise, documenting their journey down the river. The entries were mundane: water levels, campsite locations, wildlife sightings, the kind of notes any experienced river runner would make. The last entry was from yesterday morning. Day 5, making good time, planning to camp near mile marker 47 tonight. Weather clear. Patricia excited about photographing the canyon walls at sunset. Mile marker 47 was approximately where we were now, so they'd planned to be here. This wasn't an emergency stop or a random choice. They'd intended to camp at this spot. But why? There were better campsites upstream and downstream. This spot was technically in a restricted zone, though the restrictions weren't well marked. Most experienced rafters knew to avoid it, but maybe the Vosses hadn't known. Or maybe they'd come here specifically. Maybe they'd known something was here. That's when I noticed the chairs. They were positioned facing the river, about 6 feet apart. Standard folding camp chairs, the kind you can buy at any sporting goods store. One was forest green. The other was blue. The green chair was completely dry. The blue chair was soaking wet. I stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It hadn't rained in over a week. The morning dew had already burned off, and both chairs were in the same position, at the same distance from the river, getting the same amount of sun. So why was one wet and one dry? I approached slowly, my boots crunching on the gravel. The wet chair wasn't just damp, it was saturated. Water dripped from the fabric onto the rocks below, forming a small puddle that hadn't evaporated despite the afternoon heat. I touched the wet chair. Water dripped from the fabric onto the gravel. Not damp, not moist. Soaking wet, like someone had just pulled it out of the river. But that didn't make sense either. If someone had dropped the chair in the river and then retrieved it, there would be wet footprints leading from the water to the chair. There would be disturbed gravel, splash marks, something. There was nothing. Just the chair, impossibly wet, sitting in the same configuration as its dry partner. I pulled out my radio and documented what I was seeing. One folding chair. Blue fabric, completely saturated with water. No apparent source for the water. Adjacent chair is completely dry. No precipitation in the area for 8 days. No evidence of river spray or splash. I moved on to examine the rest of the camp. Near the chairs, I found 2 cups, metal camping mugs sitting on a flat rock. Both contained coffee. I touched the outside of one cup. Cold. The second cup was also cold on the outside. But when I picked them up and felt the liquid inside by gently swirling the cups, I realized something was wrong. The coffee in one cup was stone cold. The coffee in the other cup was warm, not hot, not freshly brewed, but warm, like it had been poured maybe an hour ago and was still cooling down. I set the cups down carefully and looked around. The fire pit was definitely cold. I'd already checked that. So the warm coffee hadn't come from a recent fire. Yet, here it was, defying the laws of thermodynamics, staying warm while everything around it cooled. I scanned the area. There were footprints in the fine sand near the water's edge. 2 sets, both from hiking boots, different sizes. The prints were clear enough that I could tell one person had been bigger than the other, with a longer stride. One set of prints was deeper than the other. I knelt to examine them. The deeper prints had pushed through the top layer of sand into the damp layer below, suggesting the person had been carrying weight or moving with force. The shallower prints were more cautious, placed carefully. 2 different walking patterns. 2 different mental states, maybe. I followed the prints. They led from the chairs to the water's edge, then back to the fire pit, then over to the tarp shelter. Normal camp movements. People getting water, tending the fire, arranging gear, but then the prints changed. Both sets led away from the camp, moving together, heading upstream along the gravel bar. And the pattern changed too. Both sets became deeper, faster, like both people were running, or chasing something, or being chased. The fire pit held the remains of a small fire. I knelt and touched the ashes. Cold. Dead for at least a day, maybe longer. But when I looked closer, I saw something odd. The wood hadn't burned completely. There were half-charred sticks mixed in with the ash, like someone had started a fire, let it burn for a while, then left it to die without adding more fuel. Near the fire pit, I found a pot, one of those lightweight aluminum camping pots. I picked it up and immediately felt something wrong. The outside of the pot was cold. The inside was warm. Not hot, not like it had just been on a fire, but warm, like body temperature, like someone had been holding soup in their hands and had just set it down moments ago. I looked inside. There was food, some kind of stew or soup, congealed and cold on the surface. But when I stirred it with a stick, the center was still warm, still edible, maybe a few hours old at most, but the camp was abandoned, the fire was cold. Everything about this place screamed that no one had been here for at least a full day. So how was the food still warm? I set the pot down and pulled out my radio. "This is Ranger Laramie. I'm at the reported campsite. Something's not right here. I need backup and probably a search team." The response came back crackling with static. Reception was always spotty this deep in the canyon. "Copy that, Troy. What's the situation?" "Abandoned camp, but it looks recent, very recent. There's evidence that someone was here within the last few hours, but the camp looks deserted. I'm going to do a preliminary search of the immediate area." "Copy. I'll dispatch Nina Roscoe to your location. ETA about 40 minutes. Nina was good. She'd been working the canyon for almost as long as I had, and she knew this section of river better than most. If anyone could help me figure out what happened here, it was her. While I waited, I searched the camp more thoroughly. Under the tarp, I found 2 backpacks, day packs, not overnight gear. Inside were the usual items: water bottles, energy bars, sunscreen, first aid kits. Both packs had wallets. I checked the IDs. Michael and Patricia Voss, a married couple from Portland, ages 46 and 42. The photo on Michael's license showed a balding man with a friendly smile. Patricia's photo showed a woman with short dark hair and glasses. I set the wallets aside and continued searching. There was a camera, a nice DSLR in a waterproof case. I turned it on and scrolled through the photos. The first dozen or so were standard river shots. Rapids, canyon walls, the couple posing together on the raft. Happy faces, relaxed poses, nothing unusual. But the last photo made me pause. It was taken from the camp, facing upriver. The angle suggested Patricia had taken it. I could see Michael in the foreground standing by the fire pit, but that wasn't what caught my attention. In the background, barely visible, there was something on the canyon wall, a dark patch, maybe 50 feet up, that didn't look like shadow or vegetation. It was too uniform, too defined. And when I zoomed in on the image, I could see that the dark patch had a shape, almost like a doorway or opening in the rock. But I knew this section of canyon. There were no caves or overhangs on the north wall, just sheer basalt, broken only by narrow cracks and the occasional ledge. So what was Michael looking at in this photo? I checked the timestamp. The photo had been taken yesterday afternoon at 4:37 p.m., about 24 hours ago. I put the camera in my pack and continued searching. Near the water's edge, I found the footprints I'd seen earlier. 2 sets, both heading away from the camp and upstream along the gravel bar. The prints were clear and deep, indicating the people had been walking with purpose, not casually strolling. I followed the prints. They led along the water's edge for about 30 yards, then turned sharply toward the canyon wall. And that's where they stopped. Not faded out, not obscured by rock or brush. Just stopped. Like the 2 people had walked right up to the vertical canyon wall and vanished. I stood at the spot where the prints ended and looked up. The wall rose straight above me, dark and featureless. There were no handholds, no obvious way to climb. And even if there had been, why would 2 people leave their camp, walk to this spot, and start climbing? I heard an engine echoing off the canyon walls and turned to see Nina's boat coming around the bend. She brought it alongside mine and climbed out, already scanning the scene with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen a lot of strange things in the wilderness. "What have we got?" she asked. "Couple from Portland, Michael and Patricia Voss, left their camp sometime yesterday. All their gear is still here, including wallets and camera, but there are some things that don't add up." I showed her the chairs, the wet one and the dry one. She touched the wet chair, frowning. "It hasn't rained," she said. "Nope. River spray? We're 20 feet from the water, and the river's too low to throw spray that far." She knelt and examined the chair more closely. "This is weird, Troy. The fabric is saturated, like someone dumped a bucket of water on it, but just this one chair. Not the other one, not the ground around it, just this." "There's more," I said, and showed her the pot with the warm food, the footprints that ended at the canyon wall, and finally, the photo on the camera. Nina studied the image for a long time, zooming in on the dark patch on the canyon wall. "That's not a shadow," she said quietly. "I know. And there's no cave or opening there. I've rafted past this section 100 times. I know that too." She looked up from the camera and met my eyes. "So, what is it?" "That's what we need to find out." We spent the next hour documenting everything. Nina took photos while I made notes and sketched a rough map of the camp layout. We bagged the wallets, the camera, and a few other items as evidence. The Park Service would need to contact the Voss's emergency contacts and file a missing persons report. But with each piece of evidence we collected, the situation made less sense. Nina measured the distance between the chairs, exactly 6 feet, 3 inches. "That's deliberate," she said. Most people don't space chairs that precisely. They just set them down wherever feels comfortable. She was right. The chairs had been positioned with care, like they were meant to be exactly that far apart for a specific reason. I examined the ground beneath and around the wet chair. The gravel was damp in a perfect circle, about 2 feet in diameter, centered under the chair. Outside that circle, the ground was completely dry. It was as if water had fallen straight down from the chair without spreading, without following gravity's normal patterns. "Nina, look at this," I said, pointing to the damp circle. She crouched beside me. "That's not how water behaves. It should spread out, soak into the gravel, evaporate in patches. This is too uniform, too contained." We found more oddities as we searched. Near the fire pit, partially hidden under a rock, was a small digital recorder, the kind writers or students use for taking notes. I pressed play, static at first, then voices. Michael and Patricia, talking casually about the river, the canyon, their plans for the evening. Normal conversation, slightly distorted by wind noise and the sound of the river in the background. Then Patricia's voice. "Michael, are you seeing this?" "Yeah." "What is that?" "I don't know. It looks like... Is that a shadow? But the sun's behind us. Maybe it's a rock formation. Some kind of optical illusion. No. Look, it's moving." Silence for a moment. Then Michael's voice quieter. "We should get the camera." The recording cut off. I rewound and played it again. The timestamp on the recorder showed the conversation had taken place at 4:23 p.m. yesterday. Just 14 minutes before the first photo of the dark patch on the canyon wall. "They saw something before they photographed it," Nina said. "Something that caught their attention enough to get the camera out. And then they documented it, multiple photos over almost 2 hours, watching it change. Watching it grow," Nina corrected, "or open." "Look at this," Nina said, crouched by the fire pit. She'd been sifting through the ashes with a stick. "These are pine needles mixed in with the ashes, fresh ones, green. They haven't even turned brown yet." I came over to look. She was right. There were several green pine needles in the ash, barely singed. "Maybe they fell in after the fire burned out." "From where?" She gestured at the surrounding area. "The nearest pine tree is 50 yards upstream, and look at the wind patterns here." She pointed at the ripples in the sand. "Wind in this canyon blows downstream, not up. There's no way needles fell in from that tree. So someone put them in the fire. Or someone was holding them when they were near the fire, and they fell in." I thought about that. Why would someone be holding fresh pine needles? Nina shook her head. "I don't know, but nothing about this camp makes sense." I found something else that bothered me, a water bottle, lying on its side near the wet chair. It was half full, but the cap was off. Water had spilled out, creating a small wet patch in the gravel. But that wet patch was already dry, despite being in the shade of a rock. Meanwhile, the chair was still soaking wet, still dripping. How long does it take for wet fabric to dry in these conditions? I asked Nina. She looked at the sun angle, felt the air temperature. In this heat? With this much sun exposure? Maybe an hour, tops, 2 hours if it was in shade. We found this camp about 3 hours ago. The rafting group that reported it passed through around 7 this morning. That's 4 hours ago. If the chair got wet before they passed by, it should be dry by now. Unless it's getting re-wet somehow. By what? There's no water source near it except the river, and the river's 20 feet away. We walked over to where the footprints ended at the canyon wall. In the full daylight, with 2 sets of eyes examining the area, we could see more details. The prints were deep and clear, Michael's and Patricia's, based on the boot sizes. They'd walked directly to this spot and stopped. But now I noticed something else. The final prints, the ones closest to the wall, were different from the others, deeper, more forceful, like the people had been pressing down hard, maybe pushing against something, or trying to back away from something. And there was a scuff mark just to the left of the final print, like someone had dragged their foot or been pulled forward. They had to have climbed, I said. There's no other explanation. Nina ran her hand along the rock face. But there's nothing to climb on. Look, the rock here is smooth. No cracks, no ledges, nothing you could use for handholds. Maybe they had climbing gear, ropes and harnesses. Then where is it? We didn't find any climbing equipment at the camp. She was right. We'd inventoried everything, and there was no rope, no harnesses, no carabiners or climbing hardware of any kind. I pulled out a small brush from my pack and gently swept the area around the final footprint. Sometimes you could find fibers, skin cells, blood, microscopic evidence that told you what happened. The brush caught something. A thread, dark blue, synthetic material. I held it up to the light. Looks like it came from a jacket or pack, Nina said. I bagged it carefully. So, they were here. They walked to this wall. And then, what? They didn't climb. They didn't turn around. They just vanished. Nina stepped back and looked up at the canyon wall, shading her eyes against the sun. Wait, Troy, look at this. She was pointing at something about 40 feet up. I followed her finger and saw what she'd spotted. A thin, dark line running horizontally across the rock face, about 6 inches wide. Is that a ledge? I asked. I don't think so. It's too uniform. Ledges are irregular, broken up by erosion. That looks carved. I pulled out my binoculars and focused on the line. Nina was right. It looked artificial somehow, too straight and regular to be a natural feature. And the rock along the line was darker than the surrounding stone, like it had been stained or scorched. That's where the dark patch was in the photo, Nina said. Right above that line. I lowered the binoculars. She was right. The position matched. Whatever Michael had been looking at yesterday afternoon, it was connected to that dark line on the rock face. We need to get a closer look, I said. You want to climb up there? You got a better idea? Nina thought for a moment, then nodded. All right, but we do it safe, full safety gear, and we only go if we can find a route that doesn't require technical climbing. We spent the next 20 minutes walking along the base of the canyon wall, looking for a way up. About 100 yards downstream from the camp, we found a chimney, a vertical crack in the rock that we could climb using basic scrambling techniques. Before we started, I pulled out my GPS and marked our exact position. Nina did the same. We also set a timer on our watches. If we weren't back down in 2 hours, she'd call for backup. I went first, working my way up the crack by wedging my hands and feet against the opposing walls. It was slow, sweaty work, and the rock was sharp enough to scrape my hands even through my gloves. Nina followed below me, and we climbed in silence except for the occasional warning about loose rock or a tricky section. The temperature dropped as we climbed. Not dramatically, but noticeably. Down at river level, it had been pushing 90 degrees. Up here, maybe 20 feet off the ground, it felt closer to 70. The air had a different quality too. Thinner, somehow, though we weren't high enough for altitude to be a factor. You feel that? Nina called up. The temperature drop? Yeah. That's not normal. Heat rises. We should be getting warmer as we go up, not cooler. She was right. But there were a lot of things about this situation that weren't normal. At 30 feet up, I had to stop and rest. The chimney had narrowed and I was wedged tight between the rock faces. My shoulders ached and my fingers were starting to cramp. That's when I noticed the smell. It was faint, but distinct. like ozone, the smell you get right before a thunderstorm. But the sky was clear, and there was no storm coming. Nina, you smell that? Yeah, what is it? I don't know, but I've smelled it before, during electrical storms. There's no storm, I know. We continued climbing. The smell grew stronger as we got higher, mixing with the scent of old rock and the faint mineral tang of the canyon itself. It took us almost 30 minutes to reach the level of the dark line. We traversed along a narrow ledge until we were directly above the spot where the footprints had ended. Up close, the line was even stranger. It ran perfectly horizontal across the rock face for about 20 feet, maybe half an inch deep and 6 inches wide. The rock inside the groove was darker than the surrounding stone, not like it had been burned, but like it had been somehow altered, changed at a molecular level. I ran my fingers along the groove. The texture was wrong. Basalt is rough, porous rock, full of tiny air pockets from when the lava cooled. But the rock inside this groove was smooth, almost glassy, like it had been melted and reformed. I've never seen anything like this, Nina said, running her fingers along the groove. This isn't natural, but it doesn't look like tool marks either. It's too smooth, too uniform. I took out my camera and started photographing the line from different angles. As I worked my way along the ledge, I noticed something else. There were marks on the rock below the line. Scratches, maybe, or gouges. They were faint but visible, and they seemed to radiate downward from the groove like claw marks. But they weren't random. They formed a pattern, almost like tally marks or some kind of counting system. 5 vertical scratches, then a diagonal line crossing them. Then 5 more vertical scratches, I counted them. 37 groups of 5. 185 marks total. Nina, look at this. She came over and examined the marks. Her face went pale. Those look like, I don't know, like something scraped down the rock. But what could do that? The rock here is basalt. It's one of the hardest stones there is. Human fingernails, I suggested, though I didn't believe it. No way. Fingernails would break before they could scratch basalt like this. You'd need something harder. Metal tools, maybe. Or... She stopped talking abruptly. She was staring at something just beyond where I was standing. I turned to look and felt my stomach drop. There was a patch of rock, about 3 feet in diameter, that was different from everything around it. The surface looked wet, like water had been poured on it. But when I touched it, my hand came away dry. The rock felt wrong too. Slick, but not wet. Cold, but not temperature cold. It felt like touching something that shouldn't exist, like my hand was reaching through reality and touching what lay beneath. And the cold wasn't just temperature cold. It was a deeper cold, like the rock was pulling heat out of my hand. I jerked my fingers back and saw that my skin had turned pale where I'd touched the patch. "Don't touch it anymore," Nina said sharply. I pulled my hand back and rubbed my fingers together. Sensation returned slowly, pins and needles crawling across my skin. "What do you think it is?" "I have no idea. But I don't think we should be up here." I pulled out my camera and took photos of the wet-looking patch from multiple angles. Through the lens, it looked even stranger. The camera's autofocus couldn't lock on it, searching back and forth like it couldn't tell how far away the surface was. Nina pulled out a small thermometer from her pack, the kind we use to check water temperature in streams. She held it near the patch without touching it. "Troy, look at this." The temperature reading was dropping, 72 degrees, 70, 68. It kept falling as she held the thermometer closer. "That's impossible," I said. "Heat doesn't work that way. You can't have a localized cold spot like this without some kind of refrigeration." "I know, but here it is." She pulled the thermometer back, and the reading started climbing again, back to normal ambient temperature within seconds. I pulled my hand back. "What do you think it is?" "I have no idea, but I don't think we should be up here." She was right. Everything about this felt wrong. The groove in the rock, the scratches, the patch of not quite wet stone. And somewhere, Michael and Patricia Voss had disappeared, leaving behind a camp with one wet chair and warm food in a cold pot. We started climbing back down. The descent was harder than the climb up. You can't see where you're putting your feet as easily, and the exposure felt more real. I was concentrating so hard on my footing that I almost didn't hear it. A sound, faint but distinct, coming from somewhere above us. A scraping sound, like something heavy being dragged across rock. Nina heard it too. We both froze, clinging to the rock face, listening. The scraping came again, louder this time, and then a voice. No, not a voice. Something that sounded almost like a voice, but wrong. Like someone trying to imitate human speech without understanding how it worked. The sounds were there, syllables, rhythm, inflection, but they didn't form words, just noise shaped like language. "We need to move," Nina whispered. "Now." We scrambled down the chimney as fast as we dared. The not-quite voice followed us, echoing off the canyon walls until I couldn't tell where it was coming from. Sometimes it sounded close, right above us. Sometimes it seemed to come from across the river, from the opposite canyon wall. We reached the bottom and practically ran back to the camp. Nina was breathing hard, and I could see her hand shaking as she gathered her gear. "What the hell was that?" she asked. "I don't know. Rockfall, maybe? Or wind through a crack in the stone. That wasn't wind, Troy. And you know it." I did know it, but admitting that would mean accepting that something very wrong was happening in this canyon, and I wasn't ready to do that yet. We loaded our boats quickly. I took the Voss's raft in tow, and we started heading back upriver toward the ranger station. The motorized boats could handle the current, but it was slow going. As we traveled, I kept looking back at the canyon wall where we'd been climbing. The dark line was still visible, and above it I could swear I saw that patch of wet-looking rock. But the distance made it hard to be sure. What I was sure of was the feeling I had. The same feeling you get when you're being watched. When eyes you can't see are tracking your every movement. I opened the throttle wider and focused on getting out of that canyon as fast as the boats could carry us. We reached the ranger station just before sunset. The light was already fading from the canyon bottom, and the temperature was dropping fast. Nina helped me secure the boats and carry the Voss's gear inside. I immediately called it in to my supervisor and filed a missing persons report. Within an hour, search and rescue was being mobilized. They'd start at first light tomorrow, with teams working downstream from where we'd found the camp. Nina and I spent the evening going through everything we'd found, trying to piece together what had happened. The camera yielded more photos, but nothing that explained the couple's disappearance. Just standard vacation shots, happy moments captured in pixels. Until we got to the last 5 photos. The first was the one I'd seen earlier, Michael standing by the fire pit, the dark patch visible on the canyon wall behind him. The second was taken a few minutes later, according to the timestamp. It showed the same scene, but now the dark patch was larger, noticeably larger, like it had grown in the time between photos. The third photo was even stranger. The dark patch now covered a section of wall maybe 10 feet across, and in the center, there was something that looked almost like a crack or opening. The image was slightly blurred, like Patricia's hand had been shaking when she took it. The fourth photo was worse. The opening was clearly visible now, a roughly circular hole in the canyon wall that definitely hadn't been there in the earlier photos. And standing near it, I leaned closer to the screen, squinting. There was a figure. Not Michael, someone else. The photo was too blurry to make out details, but the shape was wrong. The proportions were off, like someone had tried to draw a human from memory but gotten the ratio slightly wrong. "Jesus," Nina whispered, looking over my shoulder. "What is that?" "I don't know. But look at the timestamp. This was taken at 6:14 p.m., right around sunset. And the last photo?" I clicked to the final image. The timestamp said 6:17 p.m., just 3 minutes after the previous shot. The photo showed nothing but darkness. Not like the camera had malfunctioned or the lens cap had been left on. Just darkness, deep, absolute, total. Like the camera had been pointed into a void where light couldn't exist. And in that darkness, if you looked very carefully, you could see shapes, suggestions of forms, things that might have been human or might have been something else entirely. "They saw something," Nina said quietly. "Something came out of that opening, and they photographed it." "Or tried to," I said. "The last photo was taken at 6:17. After that, nothing. The camera was left behind with their other gear. Do you think they went into it? Into that opening?" "I don't know. But their footprints led to the canyon wall and stopped. And that wet chair, what about the chair?" I'd been thinking about it all afternoon. What if one of them did go into the water, or came out of it? What if the chair is wet because someone sat in it right after being in the river? But why? And where's the other person? Why is only one chair wet? Good questions. Questions I didn't have answers to. We sat in silence for a while, staring at the photos. Outside, full darkness had fallen over the canyon. The river was just a sound now, a constant rush in the blackness. "Troy," Nina said finally, "I've been thinking about that line we saw on the canyon wall, the groove." "Yeah?" "I think I've seen something like it before. Years ago, when I was working up in Montana, there was this section of canyon where the Blackfeet considered the area sacred. Off limits. They had stories about it. Said there were doorways in the rock that led to the underworld. Native American legends. I thought so at the time. But there were these marks on the canyon walls. Lines carved into the rock, running horizontal at certain elevations. The tribal elders said they were warnings, boundaries, places you shouldn't go past. I felt a chill run down my spine. What happened to the area? It's still there, still restricted. The tribe maintains the closure, and the Park Service respects it. I asked once why it was closed, and an old man told me that some doors should stay shut. That's all he'd say. You think that's what we found today? One of these doors? I think we found something that shouldn't be there, something that maybe was sealed or hidden or dormant for a long time, and I think Michael and Patricia Voss got too close to it. Or opened it somehow. Nina looked at me. How would they do that? I don't know. But think about the sequence. Early afternoon, they set up camp. Late afternoon, they start noticing something on the canyon wall. They photograph it. It gets bigger. An opening appears. Something comes out or they go in. And now they're gone. But what about all the weird details? The wet chair, the warm food? I shook my head. I don't know. Time distortion? Physical laws behaving differently near whatever that thing was? None of it makes scientific sense. No, Nina agreed. It doesn't. We decided to get some sleep. The search and rescue team would be here early, and we'd need to guide them to the location. But I didn't sleep well. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that last photograph. The absolute darkness with shapes moving in it. And I kept thinking about what Nina had said. Some doors should stay shut. What if we'd found a door? And what if it was already open? I was up before dawn, making coffee and checking equipment. Nina emerged from her sleeping bag looking as tired as I felt. The search and rescue team arrived just as the sun was clearing the canyon rim. 5 people, all experienced wilderness AR personnel with additional training in swift water rescue and technical climbing. The team leader was a woman named Sandra Garcia, who I'd worked with before. She was thorough, professional, and didn't waste time on bullshit. I briefed them on everything we'd found, leaving out only the stranger details that would make me sound crazy. I showed them the camp location on the map, the photos from the camera, and the footprints that ended at the canyon wall. So they either climbed or went into the water, Sandra said, studying the map. The river's not that deep in that section, I said. Maybe 6 feet at most. If they'd gone in, we'd have found something. Clothes, gear, bodies. The current's not strong enough to carry everything away. Still, we'll have divers check the river, and we'll have climbers check the canyon walls. If they're up there injured, we'll find them. The team loaded into boats and headed downstream. Nina and I followed in our own boats, bringing up the rear. The morning was cold and clear, with mist hanging over the water in thin sheets. As we navigated downriver, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were heading into something dangerous, something we weren't equipped to handle. We reached the camp just after 8 a.m. The SAR team immediately got to work, establishing a base of operations and beginning their systematic search. Divers went into the water. Climbers started working their way up the canyon walls. Ground personnel searched every inch of the gravel bars and shoreline. Nina and I led a small group to the spot where the footprints ended. In the daylight, with multiple people examining the area, the mystery only deepened. The prints were clear, deep, and went right up to the canyon wall. No signs of anyone turning around or doubling back. Just 2 sets of footprints ending at solid rock. "This doesn't make sense," one of the SAR guys said. A young guy named Rick who specialized in tracking. "People don't just vanish. There should be more prints, scuff marks, something." "There's a chimney about 100 yards downstream," I said. "We climbed up yesterday to check out an anomaly on the rock face. They might have gone up that way." Rick and 2 others went to examine the chimney while Nina and I returned to the main search area. Sandra was coordinating everything from the camp, talking to team members over the radio and marking positions on her map. "Anything yet?" I asked. She shook her head. "Nothing. It's like these people evaporated. The divers haven't found any bodies or debris in the water. The climbers are working their way along the canyon walls, but so far they haven't found any sign of anyone climbing or falling." A voice crackled over her radio. "Sandra, this is Rick. You need to come see this, all of you." There was something in his voice that made my stomach tighten. Nina and I followed Sandra as she jogged toward the chimney location. Rick and the others were standing at the base of the canyon wall, looking up. When I reached them, I saw what they were staring at. The dark line was gone. The groove we'd seen yesterday, running horizontally across the rock face. It wasn't there. I scrambled up the first 20 feet of the chimney to get a better angle, but there was nothing. Just smooth, unbroken basalt. "Troy," Nina called from below. "Was this the right spot?" "Yes. This is exactly where we climbed yesterday. I'm sure of it." "Then where's the line? Where's that patch of weird rock we saw?" I didn't have an answer. I climbed back down and stood with the others, all of us staring at a perfectly normal section of canyon wall that had been distinctly abnormal just 24 hours ago. "Maybe we were mistaken about the location," Sandra suggested. "No." Nina's voice was firm. "This is the spot. I'm sure of it. Look, there's the camp, there's the bend in the river, there's the configuration of rocks. This is exactly where we were." Rick pulled out a high-resolution camera and started taking photos of the wall. "Whatever was here, it's gone now. But maybe we can find some evidence that it existed. Mineral deposits, discoloration, anything." We spent another 2 hours searching and documenting, but found nothing. The canyon wall was exactly what it appeared to be, ancient basalt, weathered by millennia of wind and water, showing no signs of recent disturbance. By noon, Sandra called off the active search. "We'll keep the area under observation," she said, "and we'll do aerial searches of the canyon. But without any leads or evidence, there's not much more we can do here." "What about the Vosses?" I asked. "We just give up on them?" "We're not giving up, but we don't have anywhere else to look. They're not in the water, they're not on the canyon walls, and they're not in the immediate area. They're just gone." The case stayed open, but without leads, it went cold fast. Michael and Patricia Voss became another pair of names on the long list of people who'd gone into Idaho's canyons and never come back. Their families pushed for continued searches, but there was only so much we could do. We expanded the search area, checked downstream for dozens of miles, interviewed everyone who'd been on the river that week. Nothing. Nina and I kept investigating on our own, using our off-duty time to return to the site. We documented everything, took hundreds of photos, and even did some amateur rock climbing to check sections of the canyon wall we hadn't examined before. We found nothing, just rock and water and empty space. But the things that didn't make sense still didn't make sense. The wet chair, the warm food, the photos showing something that was now gone, the footprints that ended at a wall. 3 weeks after the disappearance, I was back at the site doing another walkthrough. Alone this time. Nina had warned me not to go by myself, but I couldn't let it go. Something had happened here, and I needed to understand what. I'd brought camping gear and planned to spend the night. Maybe whatever had happened to the Vosses was time-specific. Maybe it only occurred at certain times of day, or under certain conditions. I arrived in the late afternoon, giving myself plenty of time to set up before dark. The camp was exactly as we'd left it. Tarp still strung between the rocks, the ring of stones marking where the fire pit had been. Someone had taken the chairs as evidence, but I could still see the impressions in the gravel where they'd sat. I set up my tent near where their camp had been and built a small fire. Not for warmth, the evening was still pleasant, but for light, and maybe for psychological comfort. Fire is primal protection, coded into our DNA from millennia of ancestors huddling around flames, while predators prowled the darkness beyond. As the sun dropped below the canyon rim and shadows filled the gorge, I sat in a folding chair, deliberately positioning it in the same spot where the wet chair had been, and watched the canyon walls. I'd brought a notebook and started documenting everything. Temperature readings every 15 minutes, wind direction, sound levels, any changes in the environment. The temperature dropped steadily as night fell. Nothing unusual about that. But around 8 p.m. I noticed something odd. The temperature had been dropping at about 3 degrees every 15 minutes. Then suddenly, over the course of 5 minutes, it dropped 8 degrees. I checked my thermometer thinking it might be malfunctioning, but it was working fine. The air had genuinely gotten colder and fast. I wrote it down along with the time and my exact position. Science is about documentation, about finding patterns. If something was happening here, I needed data. Around 9 p.m., I heard the first sound that didn't belong. It was faint, a rustling, like fabric dragging across rock. I grabbed my flashlight and swept the area. Nothing. Just the firelight creating dancing shadows on the canyon walls. The rustling came again, from a different direction. I turned toward it, but again saw nothing. I sat back down and tried to calm my racing heart. This was the wilderness. There were always sounds, animals moving, wind through cracks in the rock, water dripping somewhere. It didn't mean anything, but the sound came again, and this time it was definitely closer. And it wasn't rustling anymore. It was footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps on gravel. I stood up, my hand going to the pistol on my hip. "Hello? Who's there?" No response. Just that steady crunch of footsteps, moving around the perimeter of my camp. Circling. I turned slowly, tracking the sound with my flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, but I couldn't see anyone. Just empty gravel, empty rocks, empty space. But the footsteps continued. They completed a full circle around my camp and then stopped. Right at the edge of the firelight. I stood there, flashlight in one hand, other hand on my pistol, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. And then the temperature dropped again. Suddenly. Dramatically. My breath started fogging in the air. The water bottle next to my chair developed a thin layer of frost. That's when I smelled it. The same ozone smell Nina and I had noticed on the canyon wall. Strong now, almost overwhelming. Nothing happened. The sky went from blue to purple to black. Stars came out, impossibly bright in the darkness. The river ran past, constant and indifferent. And I sat there watching, waiting for something I couldn't define. Around midnight I heard it, the scraping sound. The same one Nina and I had heard when we were up on the canyon wall. It was coming from across the river, from the south wall this time. A slow, rhythmic scraping, like something heavy being dragged, or something with claws, climbing. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the sound. The beam cut across the dark water and hit the opposite canyon wall, but I couldn't see anything. Just rock and shadow. The scraping continued. It seemed to be moving, working its way along the canyon wall from right to left. I tracked it with my flashlight, but the beam never caught anything solid. Just that sound, and a sense of movement in the darkness. The sound changed. Not scraping anymore, but a wet, sliding noise, like something massive and slick pulling itself across stone. My hands were shaking. I wanted to leave, to pack my gear and get the hell out, but I forced myself to stay, to observe, to document. I grabbed my notebook and wrote, 12:07 a.m., scraping sound from south wall, moving west to east. No visual confirmation. Estimated speed, slow walking pace. Then it stopped. Complete silence. Even the river seemed to hold its breath. And then I heard the voice. The not-quite voice that Nina and I had heard before. It was coming from the same location as the scraping, but now it sounded closer. Like whatever was making the sound had moved to this side of the river without crossing the water. The sounds formed shapes that were almost words, almost recognizable. Like hearing someone speak underwater or through a wall. I could tell it was communication, but I couldn't understand it. I stood frozen, listening to that impossible voice, trying to make sense of the sounds. There was a rhythm to it, a cadence that suggested meaning. But the individual sounds didn't match any language I'd ever heard. And then, clear as day, I heard my name. Troy. Not quite right. The syllables were there, but the pronunciation was off. Like someone who'd heard the word but never said it before was trying to speak it. The R was too hard, the Y too soft. Troy. Closer now. Definitely closer. My blood ran cold. Whatever this was, it knew my name. Had it heard Nina calling me? Had it somehow learned from listening to us? I stood up from the chair, my hand going to the pistol on my hip. "Who's there?" The not-quite voice came again, and this time it was multiple sounds at once. Different tones, different pitches, all slightly out of sync. A chorus of voices trying to speak as one. "Troy, Nina, come." My blood went cold. Whatever this was, it knew our names. It knew we'd been here, and it wanted us to come to it. I backed away from the fire toward my tent. The beam of my flashlight swept across the canyon walls, and for a split second I saw something. A dark patch on the rock face, in almost the same position where the groove had been. I blinked, and it was gone. Or maybe it had never been there. Maybe my mind was playing tricks in the darkness. The voices continued. They weren't getting closer anymore, but they weren't going away either. They just kept calling, repeating our names, always with that wrong pronunciation, that off-key quality that made my skin crawl. I made a decision. I packed my gear as quickly as I could, loaded my boat, and got the hell out of there. I didn't care that it was midnight. I didn't care that navigating the river in the dark was dangerous. I just needed to be somewhere else. Anywhere else. I made it back to the ranger station by 2 a.m., running on adrenaline and fear. I locked the doors, turned on every light, and sat at my desk trying to process what I'd just experienced. Had I really heard those voices? Had I really seen that dark patch reappear? Or was I losing my mind? I didn't sleep that night. At dawn, I called Nina and told her everything. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "We need to close that section of the canyon," she said finally. "On what grounds? We don't have any evidence of danger. We have 2 missing people in a situation we don't understand. That's grounds enough." She was right. I called my supervisor and made the recommendation. After some back and forth with the regional office, they agreed. The section of canyon where the Vosses had disappeared was officially closed to all river traffic, effective immediately. We put up signs, notified all the rafting outfitters, and established a patrol schedule to turn back anyone who tried to enter the restricted zone. But closing the area didn't close the case. The mystery of what happened to Michael and Patricia Voss remained unsolved. 2 months later, I was reviewing old reports when I found something that made me sit up straight. It was an incident report from 1997. A rafting party had found an abandoned camp in the same section of canyon. Same details. Camp set up properly, all gear present, no sign of the occupants. The report noted one unusual detail. One of the sleeping bags was soaking wet, despite no rain in the area. The case had gone cold. The missing person had never been found. I started digging deeper, going through archived reports dating back decades. The pattern was there, if you knew what to look for. Every few years, someone would disappear in that section of canyon. Sometimes rafters, sometimes hikers. Sometimes people who'd gone in alone and were only reported missing when they didn't come back. And in almost every case, there were anomalies. Wet gear when it shouldn't be wet. Warm food when it should be cold. Footprints that ended at canyon walls. I found 17 cases going back to 1963. 17 people who'd vanished in the same general area, leaving behind mysteries that were never solved. But as I dug deeper, I found something even more disturbing. The archives went back further than 1963. Much further. In the basement of the ranger station, in boxes that hadn't been opened in decades, I found ledgers from the early 1900s. Handwritten logs from the first park rangers who'd patrolled this area. One entry from August 1923 caught my eye. Found another one today. Prospector's Camp. Complete with tools and supplies, but no prospector. Same as the others. Coffee still warm in the pot. Bedroll wet through, though it ain't rained in weeks. Tracks lead to the north wall and stop. Johnson says we should close this section, says there's something wrong with the place. I'm inclined to agree. Another entry from September 1931. 3 men missing now in that cursed stretch of river. Found their boat grounded on the bar, all their gear aboard. No sign of struggle. One of the life jackets was dripping wet, the others bone dry. Don't make no sense. Recommended the section be closed permanently, but regional office says there's no budget for it. I I kept reading, going back further. The entries became less frequent, more fragmentary, but the pattern held. 1907. Indian guide refuses to take party through the narrow canyon. Says his grandfather told him to never camp in that section. Says the walls open up and swallow people. 1889. Lost another surveying team. Found their equipment scattered on the gravel bar. Theodolite still set up, notebook open to the last measurement. But no surveyors. Sheriff says it's the river that got them, but there's no bodies. There's never any bodies. And then I found the oldest entry. A single page, yellowed and brittle, dated 1872. It wasn't an official report, more like a personal journal that had been filed away with the other documents. The Shoshone elder told me a story today. He said this canyon has been hungry since before his people came here. Said there are cracks in the world, places where what should be separate bleeds together. Said this canyon has one of those cracks. Said we should leave the place alone, let it sleep. But we don't listen, we never do, and the canyon keeps taking its price. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the document. The canyon keeps taking its price. How many people had it taken over the centuries? How many had walked up to that wall, following footprints or voices or something else, and simply vanished? And was it getting worse? The pattern suggested it was. In the 1800s, one person every decade or so. In the early 1900s, one every 5 years. Now, almost yearly. I showed the research to Nina. She went through it carefully, taking notes, making connections I'd missed. It's cyclical, she said. Look at the dates. The disappearances cluster around late summer, late August into September. And they seem to happen more frequently in recent years. In the 60s and 70s, it was one person every 5 or 6 years. In the 80s and 90s, every 3 or 4 years. In the last 2 decades, almost every year. So, it's accelerating. Or waking up, or getting stronger. She looked at me. Troy, what if that line we saw, that groove in the rock, what if it's not just a marking? What if it's a seal, something put there to keep something else contained? By who? The Shoshone. Maybe. Or whoever was here before them. That journal entry said the place has been hungry since before the Shoshone came. That suggests something much older. I thought about the tally marks we'd seen on the canyon wall. 185 marks. 185 what? Years? Decades? Sacrifices? There's something else, Nina said, pulling out a geological survey map. Look at this. The canyon narrows at that exact point. It's the deepest, narrowest section of the whole gorge. The walls are closest together there. So, what if that's not a coincidence? What if that's why the crack is there? The pressure, the stress of all that rock. What if it created a weak point? Not a geological weak point, but something else. A thin spot in reality. It sounded insane, but it was the only theory that fit all the facts. So, what do we do? I asked. We keep that section closed. We keep people away. And we watch. For what? For whatever comes next. For when the seal breaks completely. She paused, looking at the old documents spread across my desk. Troy, that wet chair. The warm coffee. The footprints ending at the wall. I don't think those are just anomalies. What are they? I think they're evidence of 2 realities overlapping. Michael and Patricia weren't just in one place. They were in 2 places simultaneously. One version of them in our world, one version somewhere else. The wet chair was in the other place. The warm coffee was in the other place. And eventually the other place pulled them through completely. You're saying they're alive? Somewhere? Nina shook her head. I'm saying they were pulled into something that isn't our reality. Whether they survived that transition. She didn't finish the sentence. The canyon section remained closed. Life moved on. I transferred to a different station the following year. Couldn't stand being that close to that stretch of river anymore. Nina stayed on, keeping watch, documenting any unusual activity. We stayed in touch. Every few months, she'd call with an update. Nothing significant. Just small things. Strange sounds at night. Lights that didn't match star positions. The occasional report from a boater who'd ignored the closure and come back shaken, talking about voices in the darkness. 5 years after the Vosses disappeared, Nina called me with news. Troy, you need to come back here. There's something you need to see. I drove out the next day. She met me at the ranger station and we took boats down to the restricted section. As we approached, she pointed to the North Canyon wall. The dark line was back. Not a groove this time. A crack, a genuine crack in the rock, running horizontally for about 30 feet at the same elevation where we'd seen the line before. And from the crack, something was seeping. Not water. Not liquid at all. Something that looked like smoke but didn't behave like smoke. It drifted downward, against the natural buoyancy of warm air, pooling at the base of the canyon wall before slowly spreading across the ground. How long has it been doing this? I asked. I noticed it 3 days ago. It's getting worse. More of that smoke stuff every day. We approached cautiously, keeping our distance from the spreading pool of whatever it was. Up close, it didn't look like smoke at all. It looked like darkness made liquid, like concentrated shadow that moved of its own accord. Nina, we need to report this. Get scientists out here. Figure out what this is. I already did. They're coming next week. But Troy, I don't think they're going to find an explanation. I think this is beyond explanation. She was probably right. Some things in this world don't fit into neat categories. Some mysteries don't get solved. Michael and Patricia Voss were still out there somewhere. Or maybe they weren't. Maybe they'd stepped through a doorway that shouldn't exist and ended up somewhere that couldn't be mapped. All I know is this. Sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I hear voices. Not quite right, not quite words, but close enough that I almost understand them. And they're always calling me to come back. Back to that canyon. Back to that crack in the wall. But some doors should stay shut, and some invitations shouldn't be accepted.